Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. Should be a great, great program. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notifications bell. We are going to have a very, very good show tonight. Yeah, let's go. Let's do it.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action. Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. Should be yet another great, great show. We got different topics we can discuss on here. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notifications bell. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar, the way we do things here is I give my opening remarks. That's what I'm going to talk about. Just the first hour or so, I talk about what's on my mind. Then from there, we do the roll call, where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. We find out who is watching, who's on the other side of the camera. It's always really nice. We are a nice little community here of people who watch this channel, but we're also very, very large and diverse. I mean, there is a good crew of people. There's at least 1,000 people that watch every single one of these streams, right? At least 1,000 people. But there's usually a few hundred that are watching live, and we start to know each other, right? We start to recognize names. It's kind of neat. Then after that, I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. So if there's something you would like me to address in the second half of our program, if you got a comment or a question or something you want me to react to or just whatever it is, send me a Rumble rant on the Rumble. Send me a Rockfin tip on the Rockfin. Send me a super chat here on YouTube, and I will do my best to give you an answer. I usually answer everything. Every so often, there's something I just can't answer. But I generally answer everything. That's the way we do it here. For the most part, give me a super chat. I'll give you an answer. So yeah, that's the second half of our program. That's what we do. So that's going to be awesome. I wanted to remind you all to check out the CPI YouTube channel, the Center for Political Innovation YouTube, because we've started up the morning messages once again. There was a great morning message that I'll probably play in the second half of our show from the Midwest Center for Political Innovation. They had a great meetup. They had a great meetup. And so, it was really, really awesome. Here, I'll link the CPI YouTube channel. But yeah, every morning you can start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism on the CPI YouTube channel. And later tonight, it appears, before I go to bed tonight, the first videos of our conference are going to be posted on the CPI YouTube channel and on this YouTube channel. So fingers crossed. I'm just waiting for the video to come through. I'll do some final edits after our guys have worked on it. They've done a great job. The clips I've seen so far are utterly amazing. If you weren't in Oregon to see it live, you are going to be blown away by the videos that come out. That's going to be great. So go and subscribe to the CPI YouTube channel so that you're keeping up with the morning messages, keeping up with all of that. Another quick, important reminder, just a quick, important reminder about an event that's coming up. We all remember how last year there was a very, very important anti-imperialist rally in Washington, D.C. called Rage Against the War Machine. Do folks remember Rage Against the War Machine? It was a very, very important anti-imperialist rally that happened in Washington, D.C., bringing together libertarians, Republicans, Democrats, all kinds of people who did not want to escalate the United States into World War III. Well, they're doing it again this year. And my good friends, Nick Brana and Angela McCurdle, are sponsoring the rally, and it's on February 17th. It's called Defeat the Deep State, Rage Against the War Machine. So be there. Be there. We, as Center for Political Innovation, we are going to be involved. We are going to be sponsors of the rally. We're going to be there. We have a special way of intervening in the rally. We're going to make a great contribution to the day's events that you will soon, you'll see if you're there, and you'll be finding out about. It's going to be very exciting. So just wanted to let people know to mark their calendars for February 17th next year. As we get towards the holiday season, people are winding down for the end of the year, etc. Start thinking about how we're going to make 2024 a year of anti-imperialism, a year of class struggle, etc. That's going to be very, 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 very important. So just mark your calendar for that. And hey, we could always use more members in the Center for Political Innovation, right? We have had now 12 new people join since our convention, right? 12 new people have joined. Now, our goal was to recruit 20 people from the convention. So we're about eight to go. So if 8 more people join, we will have reached our goal of recruiting 20 people as a result of our convention. So, if you haven't joined yet, go ahead and become a member. We have Zoom calls every Saturday for the membership. We have various committees. We have a website. We have locals now that are forming. We're moving ahead as an organization. We'd love to have you as a member. You can join at that link, cpiusa.org, and then just hit join. Good to have you. Good to have you. So I guess from here, I'll be jumping into my opening remarks, what I'm going to be talking about for this evening. So like I said, if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of our program, Rumble rants on the Rumble, Rockfin tips on the Rockfin, super chats on YouTube. Give me something to talk about in the second half of our show. For the first half of our show, I am going to talk about a news item which is interestingly not getting a lot of coverage. Sometimes when things intensify on the Korean Peninsula, they make a very, very big deal out of it. And other times they don't. And I've noticed that it is slipping into mainstream media. They are acknowledging that right now there's a standoff going on the Korean Peninsula. Things are very, very intense. However, they're not making a huge deal out of it. And they're certainly not giving you the details of what's happening. I'm going to pull up a mainstream media report. This is a mainstream media report that came out in the last 24 hours, trying to explain to viewers, I think this is Bloomberg News, trying to explain to American audiences what's happening on the Korean Peninsula. It's very, very important what's happening. And this is the typical biased American mainstream media coverage of the recent events.
Point.
Well, the missile probably would have flown for about an hour, and that is consistent with the North Korean ICBM. We don't have it officially out yet, but the flight time indicates that it's an ICBM launched on a lofted trajectory, which is kind of like straight up and a little bit down. And if so, it would be the 5th of the year. And the launch comes as Kim Jong-un, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, is heading into a major policy-setting meeting at the end of the year. And it's a show of strength to the cadres in his ruling party and to his people that the nuclear program is making progress, that it needs to be further advanced for the following year, and that the sacrifices that the people and the economy are making for this are justified in North Korea's propaganda, in the way that North Korea's propaganda apparatus will frame it.
So we're told that is what you just heard. That's how Bloomberg News is covering this, that North Korea launched a missile because the tyrant Kim Jong-un is trying to show his strength. He's trying to show his strength as the year goes on, right? He's trying to show his strength and tell his people that all the harsh sacrifices that he's making them endure are worth it, right? That's what we're told. North Korea has launched an intercontinental ballistic missile. Apparently, it is capable of hitting both Japan and the United States. And we are told this is a show of strength, right? That's the version of events. And they're not going into great detail about it. They're not really going into much detail, but basically to show off strength, Kim Jong-un decided to shoot off a missile, an intercontinental ballistic missile. Here's another news outlet in America covering it. Again, just to show you how ridiculously biased American news can be.
Launched a short-range ballistic missile as it...
This is Australian news, I guess. So it shows how Australian news can be a little bit biased.
Meanwhile, North Korea launched a short-range ballistic missile as it criticises US military presence in South Korea. The missile was launched towards the sea off North Korea's east coast and flew 570 kilometres before landing in the ocean. The country's defence ministry says America's presence in the region could be seen as a preview of nuclear war. All of North Korea's ballistic missile activities remain banned by United Nations Security Council resolutions. Meanwhile...
Oh, yeah. So I guess now listen to the language they use there. This is really telling. Listen to this.
Before landing in the ocean, the country's defence ministry says... America's presence in the region could be seen as a preview of nuclear war.
That America's presence in the region could be seen as a preview of nuclear war. So the first one that we got from Bloomberg News is that Kim Jong-un wanted to show strength to the Korean people and show them that the harsh sacrifices that they have to make are worth it. The second one says that they launched it because America's presence in the region could be seen as a preview to nuclear war. America's presence in the region. Now, I think I've got another report about it. I think this is the Japanese government. Japan warning that nuclear missile could reach the United States. This is the Japanese Prime Minister.
昨晩に続きまして、本日北朝鮮が弾道ミサイル発射をしました。私の方からは国民の皆さんに対する情報提供、さらに安全確認徹底するように指示を出したところです。そして現在のところまで被害は報告はされておりません。
今回発射された ICBM 級弾道ミサイルは今回の飛翔軌道に基づいて計算をしますと、弾頭重量等によっては1万5000キロメートルを超える射程となりうるとみられ、その場合、米国全土が射程に含まれることになります。
All right. So that's Japan is basically saying this missile could hit anywhere in the United States. Be very afraid. What are all of them leaving out? There's a rather important fact here. We'll put on another one. See if they mention it in this one, right? We'll see. Let's see if I don't even know what DW News, right? This is from Germany. Let's see if they mention. There's a key fact that is being left out of all of these news reports. And this is why I'm showing you this. You want to talk about bias in media. There's a pretty key fact that's being left out. And I'm showing you just news report after news report about what's going on in the Korean Peninsula. One of them says that North Korea shot off an intercontinental ballistic missile to show strength. Another one says that North Korea shot off an intercontinental ballistic missile because of, U.S. presence could be a prelude to nuclear war. Let's see if DW News, we're going to put DW News on. Let's see if they say what's really going on here, because there's this rather important detail in the news item that is being left out, which I can guarantee you the overwhelming majority of people who see this on the news are not aware of, right? That there's this really, really, really important detail about all of this that is being left out in all this coverage. And I want you all to see this, right? People say, oh, no, don't watch RT. That's propaganda. Oh, don't watch CGTN. Don't watch Press TV. That's propaganda. I'm telling you, right? You just saw coverage of this, and it all left out of very, very, very important details. Let's see now if DW Analysis mentions it. Let's see if DW Analysis mentions it. This is news from Germany. Right?
Range ballistic missile, is it?
We already watched that one. Sorry. We'll watch the DW News piece, right? To see if here we go.
Korea has fired another intercontinental ballistic missile just hours after it launched its previous test. Japan says the missile had the potential to reach Japan or the continental United States. A recent increase in tests by Pyongyang has led to a warning coming from Washington that any attack from North Korea would bring an end to Kim Jong-un's regime. DW's East Asia correspondent James Chadha reports.
An intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, rocketing into the skies above North Korea earlier this year. South Korea is already described as a grave provocation. Pyongyang's launch of a suspected similar ICBM on Monday, its fifth this year. Japan says the solid-fuel missile has a potential range of 15,000 kilometers, far enough to hit anywhere on US territory. This is where the latest North Korean missile flew. The ICBM was launched from near Pyongyang, reaching an altitude of 6,000 kilometers. It landed 70 minutes later, about 1,000 kilometers away in waters east of North Korea, just outside Japan's exclusive economic zone. Tokyo and Washington have condemned Pyongyang's actions.
We strongly condemn these actions, which are in clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions and threaten peace and stability in the region.
We're just going through all this coverage, right? And they're all just talking about North Korea shoots off a missile. It's a big threat. It could hit America. It could hit Japan. Be very afraid.
China, North Korea's only official ally, didn't criticize Pyongyang's launch, saying only that the situation on the Korean peninsula was complex.
Attempts to solve the problem through military deterrence and pressure will not work. It will only backfire, further intensify contradictions and intensify tensions.
Pyongyang says so-called war moves by Washington were the reason for its launch. Amid growing North Korean threats, the US, South Korea and Japan have accelerated military cooperation in recent months. A US nuclear-powered submarine arrived in South Korea on Sunday.
Wait a second! Do you see how long it took them to tell us that? Did you just hear what they just said? Right? I was just covering all this coverage. Did you hear what that reporter just said? I'm going to play that for you again. Right? Because without that detail, none of what North Korea is doing makes any sense. They just finally, in all of this coverage I just showed you, they just finally told you why North Korea launched the ICBM. Let's roll it back. Let's roll it back.
War moves by Washington were the reason for its launch. Amid growing North Korean threats, the US, South Korea and Japan have accelerated military cooperation in recent months.
So why did North Korea on Monday and today, on Monday, which is today, why did they test an intercontinental ballistic missile?
A US nuclear-powered submarine arrived in South Korea on Sunday.
The USA just sent a nuclear submarine to South Korea on Sunday. A submarine that is nuclear equipped that could shoot a nuclear missile at North Korea. The USA sent a nuclear submarine to South Korea, basically putting an American submarine that could fire a nuclear missile at North Korea in South Korea. And so North Korea responded by showing that they could shoot an intercontinental ballistic missile. Now, none of the coverage thought that was an important detail. Right? They just said, that Kim Jong-un wanted to show his strength. And then the other one, you saw how they coded it. They vaguely mentioned it. They said, well, North Korea said that American presence in South Korea could be a prelude to war. Did you see how much scary, evil North Korean, be afraid coverage you had to watch before they told you that the only reason North Korea actually launched this missile was because America had sent a nuclear submarine to South Korea. America is getting its nukes prepared. It's got a submarine that could launch a nuclear missile at North Korea. Now, you don't think that that's like maybe an important detail to include in your coverage? But no, they didn't mention that. The USA just sent a nuclear submarine that could destroy North Korea with a nuke. It sent that to South Korea. And so North Korea says, okay, under these circumstances, we're going to show that if you attack us, we can shoot off an ICBM. We have a missile that could potentially hit the United States. Now, that is just a great example. This is just a coverage of today's events, of how ridiculously one-sided American media is. North Korea, and then if you watch this piece, what did they say before that, right? It is not just this nuclear submarine, right? What do they say here on DW News?
The region.
China, North Korea's only official ally, didn't criticize. Pyongyang says so-called war moves by Washington were the reason for its launch.
Said that war moves by Washington are the reasons for its launch. Not to show strength to his people, not to tell them the sacrifices he's making them endure are worth it. Blah, 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 blah. No, it's war moves by the United States.
Amid growing North Korean threats, the US, South Korea, and Japan have accelerated military cooperation in
USA, South Korea, and Japan are accelerating their military cooperation. That's like an important detail, right? 3 countries that don't like you. South Korea, Japan, the former colonizer of the Korean Peninsula, the United States that killed 4 million Korean people in the Korean War and then caused mass malnutrition in North Korea in the 90s, with imposed sanctions and genocidal sanctions. All 3 of those countries are coordinating their military activities.
Recent months, a US nuclear-powered submarine arrived in South Korea on Sunday.
And to top the icing on the cake, a US nuclear military submarine arrived in South Korea. If you're trying to explain why North Korea is shooting missiles off, maybe you should explain that you're putting nuclear submarines right next to them and you're having military exercises and drills with all their enemies. You think that might be like an important detail in any of this coverage? I mean, this is showing you how ridiculously biased American media is.
And all that straining already fractious ties. This North Korean satellite launch last month led to South Korea withdrawing from parts of a military pact aimed at easing tensions. But North Korea...
Right, so North Korea launched a satellite, not a military item, just a satellite. And South Korea used that as an excuse to withdraw from some of the agreements that were reached. So that might be important to mention also, right? That because they launched a satellite, something that Russia, something that China, something that Vietnam, something that America, something that all kinds of countries do all the time, just because they launched a peaceful satellite, South Korea ripped up some key nuclear agreements. You think that might be why they launched the missile? I'm just saying.
Withdrew from the agreements completely. These still images appear to show Pyongyang bolstering its military presence at its southern border since.
Right. Yeah. In the aftermath of South Korea having all these drills and rehearsals and practices with Japan and America for all-out war, they, got their military forces on the border a little bit beefed up in case this is the time that they're planning an attack. Like, do you see how they go out of their way to not tell you that North Korea is responding to very real threats from the United States, very real threats from South Korea, very real threats from Japan? They make it just sound like Kim Jong-un was just being an angry, horrible tyrant and decided to shoot a missile into the ocean.
Now, with the latest ICBM launch, another thorn in the side of stability on the Korean Peninsula.
So there you go. There you go. That is very, very, very typical Western media coverage of what's going on the Korean Peninsula. Very, very typical. The level of bias is shocking. It should be shocking to anyone who knows anything about objectivity, right? As a journalist, your job is to explain why things are happening. And it seemed like all the news reports you just watched were going out of their way not to give you very key information about what was taking place on the Korean Peninsula. And that is why I have been such a dedicated anti-imperialist, is seeing how blatantly U.S. media lies about these situations and does not give you the facts about what's happening on the ground. It is something that I've been furious about for a very, very, very long time. And yes, there is an escalation going on now on the Korean Peninsula. And honestly, the fact that they're not giving it coverage is something I think we should all be very concerned about, because generally they tend to give North Korea a lot of coverage. But the fact that they're not giving it coverage makes me wonder if the U.S. imperialists are up to something. if they're planning something, because usually when North Korea shoots off a missile, they have all kinds of hate North Korea, fear-mongering stuff. And this time they're not saying that. So why? It's almost like they want to distract from it. One thing that they have pointed out is that it appears that North Korea is very involved in cooperating with Russia to help Russia win the war in Ukraine, and that they are heavily involved in helping cooperate with Iran and with China, right? And that North Korea is a very, very big part of the anti-imperialist coalition that is emerging around the world. There is even some allegation that North Korea may be providing aid or support to the Palestinians at this point. And I think all of that is an argument in their favor. They've done a lot to just lie to people about the North Koreans, right? There's a book that was circulated a while back. It was a few years back. It was circulating, and it's called The Cleanest Race. And it's an attempt to argue that the North Koreans are like the Nazis. They are racial supremacists, and it has quotes from Kim Il-sung and from North Korean leaders talking with pride about the Korean people, about the Korean people are very clean, the Korean people have a lot of discipline, etc. And I had a friend who read the book, and he said, like, you could write a book like this about black people in America and just quote Malcolm X, right? Malcolm X would say things about black people. Black people are the strongest people in the world. Black people, it's like any group that has been marginalized and oppressed, when it's standing up and fighting for itself, it's going to praise itself. And for them to equate that with the Nazis is utterly ridiculous. And on top of that, one thing that the book just conveniently leaves out is that North Korea has a record of solidarity with non-Korean people, people of other races, fighting for their freedom around the world, that is massive. I know I have showed this on here before, but maybe some of you weren't watching then. I want you to see this again. I want you to see this again. This is one of the most beautiful statues, works of art in the world. And I want you to see it. Senegal, the African nation of Senegal, built a statue to celebrate its independence. Right? This is the African nation of Senegal. They built this beautiful, beautiful statue. Beautiful, beautiful statue. And do you know who designed that and who built that? That beautiful statue of an African father and an African mother and an African baby pointing toward the future, that beautiful, beautiful monument in Senegal was built by the North Koreans. Right? It was built by the North Koreans. The North Koreans built this. They, of all the countries in the world that Senegal could have hired to build their monument to celebrate their victory over colonialism, their independence, they hired the North Koreans to build their independence monument. And in addition to that, North Korea, despite being a very, very small country, with what little resources they had in the 1970s and 80s, do you know who they gave support to? Nelson Mandela. Google North Korea, Nelson Mandela. Right? There's a whole article on Wikipedia about Africa-North Korea relations. And go through it. Read it from the mouths of the enemy. Wikipedia is heavily edited. Right? Nelson Mandela, North Korea strongly condemned. This is Wikipedia. This isn't communist news I'm reading you from. This is Wikipedia. Wikipedia. Africa-North Korea relations. North Korea strongly condemned apartheid in South Africa and refused to establish any diplomatic relations with the apartheid regime. When North Korea opened up for foreign tourists in 1986, it banned citizens of South Africa from entering. Militants affiliated with the African National Congress received training from North Korean agents at hidden camps in Angola. Let me just re-emphasize this. So North Korea is this country that we're told is racial supremacist. It's completely isolated from the world. But in the 1980s, when Nelson Mandela was labeled a terrorist by the American government, which he was, Nelson Mandela, who Obama went to his funeral and they cheered him, but he was labeled a terrorist by the American government. North Korea was such a strong supporter of Nelson Mandela that they banned any tourists from the apartheid regime of South Africa from coming to their country. And they sent their military personnel to Angola to set up training camps to train African National Congress fighters to fight against apartheid. And South Africans were going over the border into Angola to get military training from the North Koreans. You want to talk about internationalism? You want to talk about a record of solidarity? That is amazing. They didn't have any diplomatic relations with the apartheid government of South Africa, and they were offering military training to the African people in their fight against the apartheid regime. What else? During the Rhodesian Bush War, right? Remember Rhodesia? That was another apartheid regime named after Cecil Rhodes, the genocidal white farmer. The guy the Rhodes Scholar Program is named after, Cecil Rhodes, the genocidal colonizer of Africa. Rhodes Scholar Program, Rhodes Round Table Group, the guy who started the Council on Foreign Relations. It was established after his death as the Round Table Group. The prominent British imperialist, Cecil Rhodes. The colonial settler regime of Rhodesia was named after him. And when the white supremacist regime of Rhodesia was facing an uprising from the African people who were fighting for their independence, fighting to get their land back, what happened? During the Rhodesian Bush War, North Korea opposed the white-ruled government of Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, and supported black African guerrilla fighters alongside China and the Soviet Union. Soldiers of the Zimbabwe African National Union were invited to a hidden camp near Pyongyang, where North Korean military officers trained them with explosives. So again, Africans that are fighting against the colonial settler regime of Rhodesia, fighting to get their land, are going all the way to a hidden base in North Korea near Pyongyang to get explosives training. After Rhodesia became Zimbabwe in 1980, North Korea maintained an alliance with Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe. And little known fact, it's not here on the Wikipedia, little known fact, they actually went as far as providing him with personal security. The bodyguards of Robert Mugabe were provided, by North Korea. The record of North Korea in standing with oppressed people and standing with people around the world fighting for their freedom is massive. And they don't ever tell you that. They make you believe that they're this isolated hermit kingdom. They're just this isolated country up in the mountains. They've never connected with people anywhere in the world. They just live all by themselves. And that's just a lie. That's just an absolute lie, right? And in fact, one of the greatest sources on this, right, is look at the North Korean country study. The North Korean country study of the Library of Congress, right? I love the country studies of the Library of Congress because if you tell people economic data about socialist countries and economic data about, anti-imperialist states, they always go, that's not true. Everyone knows they're all starving there. Go and read what the U.S. Library of Congress has written about North Korea. They have the official country study of North Korea published by the U.S. Library of Congress. It is full of very, very good and useful information, right? Very, very good and useful information. And I will share some of that information with you. Here, right? Since we're talking about North Korea, let's just go over the facts about North Korea that you will find in the country study that you will never hear acknowledged in American media, right? Here we go. Just waiting for my computer to come up. All righty. All righty. Let's just go over some facts about North Korea. This is according to the country study, the official study of North Korea by the U.S. Library of Congress. Between 1948 and 1990, the life expectancy of the average person in North Korea increased by 30 years. According to the U.S. Library of Congress, from 1948 to 1990, the life expectancy of the average person living in North Korea increased by 30 years. 30 years. You want to talk about a big change in people's life expectancy? To have a 30, do you know what it would mean to have a 30-year change in life expectancy? Do you know what that would mean? Do you know how much economic opportunity that would involve? Do you know how much development, how much access to medical care, how much security and stability that for a country to increase its life expectancy by 30 years? But that's what North Korea achieved. They never tell you that, now do they? What else does the U.S. country study say? In 1955, North Korea had only 285 hospitals in the entire country. By 1986, it had 2,401 hospitals. Now do the math. That's almost 10 times as many hospitals. Under the leadership of the Korean Workers' Party, North Korea got 10 times as many hospitals as it had before. The U.S. Library of Congress study also says that illiteracy was wiped out and universal compulsory education became available to all children. Again, these are rather important facts. If you're wondering why North Korea stays in power despite everything that they've thrown at them, why the Korean Workers' Party continues to maintain the loyalty of the population. These are very, very important things to understand. And I find it very, very frustrating that this never gets acknowledged. We've just been told that North Korea is starving and miserable, and that everyone there is starving and miserable, and communism's the reason. Everyone's there is poor and starving and miserable because communism is just so bad. And I mean, the facts don't line up with that at all. You're on the list, John, and thank you. Any more super chats? I see Dark Dragonov sent one in, and Cecil Rhodes, and thank you, John. And is there anyone on the Rumble? I don't see anything on the Rumble, on the Rockfin. But yeah, keep the super chats rolling in. Give me something to talk about in the second half of our show. Now, this one I just keep coming back to, right? And this next thing I'm going to show you on the screen, that's rather important to talk about when you talk about North Korea. Again, if I quoted any source that wasn't a mainstream source, you wouldn't believe me. So I'm going to show you an article from the BBC. I'm going to show you first the whole article so you know the context, right? This is the article. North Korea struggles to control changing economy. That's from BBC News. All right, published in 2007. North Korea struggles to control changing economy. This is not from the Korean news. This isn't from Communist Daily. This is from BBC. the British Empire, British government media. And I'm going to show you one of the things that article says. This is a screenshot from this BBC article. What does it say? At one time, North Korea's centrally planned economy seemed to work pretty well. Indeed, in the initial years after the creation of North Korea following World War II, with spectacular results. Mass mobilizations of the population, along with Soviet and Chinese technical assistance and financial aid, resulted in annual growth rates estimated to have reached 20%, even 30% in the years following the devastating 1950 to 1953 Korean War. As late as the 1970s, South Korea languished in the shadows of the economic miracle north of the border. In the West, governments fretted that communist-backed North Korea was putting the Western-backed capitalist South to shame. Did you just hear that? Up into the 70s, North Korea was doing way better than South Korea. They never tell you that, do they? South Korea's boom didn't start happening until the 80s, and North Korea didn't start having problems really until the fall of the USSR in the early 90s. The malnutrition, the economic problems that they had, they came in the early 90s. They never share with you all the tremendous achievements that are listed in the U.S. Library of Congress country study or even acknowledged in this BBC article. North Korea, which is a country that started out with nothing, deeply impoverished, and then had a huge, devastating war called World War II, and then 5 years later had a huge, devastating war called the Korean War. And amid all of that, they've been able to not only have all of these dramatic achievements in terms of expanding their life expectancy by 30 years, wiping out illiteracy, building 10 times as many hospitals as they had before, but then to top it all off, now they're launching their own satellites into space, and they're launching intercontinental ballistic missiles. And despite the fact that the Soviet Union didn't have their back anymore in the 1990s and circumstances where any other government on earth would have collapsed because they were surrounded, they managed to hold out. And now they're launching satellites into orbit. They're doing amazing things. None of this is ever acknowledged by the American media. And I just proved to you that they know these things to be true. They don't even bother to tell us that when they shoot off an intercontinental ballistic missile, it's because America just sent a nuclear submarine to South Korea to threaten them with nuclear annihilation. They make it sound like, it's just some tyrannical display of rage. Everything that we hear about the Korean Peninsula is very, very biased. We are not being told the truth about what is going on the Korean Peninsula. We are being lied to. And, we at the Center for Political Innovation, we support North Korea. Now, we don't want to adopt their system because their system is for Korea. Juche ideology is a Korean interpretation of Marxism-Leninism. Right? It would never work in this country. We're not Korean. But we support North Korea because they've broken out of the Western financial system. They've taken control of their resources. They're part of this new economy that's emerging. We support them on that basis. We support any country that breaks free from this system, and we fight for the day that this country breaks free from that system as well. It's not enough to have Russia free from Western imperialism, standing on its own 2 feet. Not enough to have China free from Western imperialism, standing on its own 2 feet. Not enough to have Cuba do it. Not enough to have Iran do it in Venezuela and Nicaragua. Not enough to have Zimbabwe do it in West Africa, Niger. Not enough. We want America to break free from the imperialist system. That is what we want. We want Pennsylvania, Ohio, Texas, Alabama, New York, California to break free from the grip of the international bankers, the international war monopolies. We want America to break free from the decaying Western system. And so whenever any country breaks free from the decaying Western system, this is a victory for the American working class. And whenever any country is attacked and destroyed by the Western financial system, that is a loss. That is a defeat for the American working class. This is the way revolutionaries should understand world events. North Korea is our friend because the same big corporations that are getting rich off of American taxpayer money in the form of weapons being sent to Israel and Ukraine are the same corporations that are getting rich off of threatening North Korea and piling American weaponry into South Korea. The same American banks that have gotten rich trying to crush North Korea with sanctions, trying to lock them out of the international financial system, are the same big banks that have rigged our American political system and devastated and foreclosed homes all across America. We have the same enemy as the North Koreans. The North Koreans are fighting against the global system of imperialism, the British system, the British financial system. And the American people need to do the same. And this is called revolutionary internationalism. This is called revolutionary defeatism. We never celebrate our own government crushing people around the world. And we never stand with our own government when it moves to crush them and enforce the international financial system. We welcome the defeat of Wall Street. We welcome the defeat of the Pentagon. And we celebrate the victories of any country that can stand up to this satanic global order. Capitalism in its monopoly stage, imperialism, as Vladimir Lenin labeled it, the rule of the world by trusts, cartels, and syndicates. And it is our job to do all that we can to loosen the binds and the chains that the imperialists put on these countries, to give them air to breathe, and to strengthen the new alternative economy that is emerging centered around the BRICS countries. This is what it means to be an anti-imperialist. This is what it means to be a socialist. It means we stand with the oppressed peoples of the world against imperialism. It means we tell the American working class who their real friends and who their real enemies are. And we don't just do it on the internet. We took this message to the White House. This is us back in March, not that long ago. It's funny. It seems like a million years ago, but just back in March, we were at the White House. We were at the White House, right? Bringing this message. Do I have the video here? Oh, do I have to download it again? All right, I will show you what we did. We took this very message to the White House, and I've showed it on these streams before, but I'll show it to you again. We are not afraid. We are very open about what side we are on in the global class war. And we are very open about how a true American patriot, a true lover of this country, sees the North Koreans as his allies, sees the Wall Street bankers, the British Empire, the London Stock Exchange, the Ukrainian neo-Nazis, the Zionist settler regime in Israel, sees them as the enemy. I'm going to put our video from being in front of the White House and talking about peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. I'm going to put that on the screen. Better yet, you know what I might do? I might show you the whole rally that we did. We had a small rally at the White House, and I might just show you everything we said, because a lot of our members got on the bullhorn that day and spoke up. And, rather than just showing you the North Korea part, I'm going to show you the whole thing, because that was a great, great day at the White House when we spoke up for the American people and their true interests. We were in front of the White House. You will see the White House on the screen behind us. You will see us in front of the White House, and you will see members of CPI with our beautiful banner about peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula, our beautiful banner about the stupid summit for democracy, which was really a summit of hypocrisy. You will see us in front of the White House. I'm going to show you what we did at the White House. Our organization, we had a gathering, the Summit Against Hypocrisy. We did this back in March. We gathered at the White House about a month after the Rage Against the War Machine rally. We had our gathering, Summit Against Hypocrisy. And during that summit on Sunday afternoon, we found our way over to the White House. And I will show you that rally, right? We'll stop it. We'll talk about it. But I want you all to see this, right? This is what our job is. This is what the Center for Political Innovation does. We go to the American people with a message of true patriotism. We are the real patriots. We are the real lovers of this country. To be a true American, to really love this country, means that you oppose the imperialist bankers that are destroying it. So, yeah, this is CPI at the White House back in March. This was a great day, one of the best days I had this year. We're here today because Joe Biden is going to have a war propaganda show next week. He's calling it a summit for democracy, but we're here to expose it for what it really is, which is a summit of hypocrisy. And we are having our summit against hypocrisy. Joe Biden's war propaganda show about demonizing Russia, demonizing China, demonizing Venezuela, demonizing Cuba, demonizing Iran, and speaking in the name of democracy, when at the very same time they're suppressing our civil liberties over here. They're censoring us on social media. They're empowering the FBI to spy on us. They're violating our civil liberties. They're suppressing third parties. And he wants to lecture the world on democracy. Well, we're here to say we don't want a war propaganda show. We don't want the summit for democracy. We're here to oppose the drive toward war. We need jobs and schools and healthcare and education here in the United States of America. We don't need a war propaganda show. They're spending all this money to fly in leaders from around the world to publicize this war propaganda show to build the case. Our enemies aren't in Venezuela. Our enemies aren't in Iran. Our enemies aren't in China or Russia. Our enemies are on Wall Street. Our enemies are in the Pentagon. Our enemies are among the billionaire multinational oligarchy that's running this country and grinding this country into poverty. That's right. We are here to oppose Joe Biden's propaganda show. We are here to say that it's time to fight for jobs, healthcare, and education here in the United States. We need a better country at home, not more wars around the world. We reject Joe Biden's propaganda show. We say he is not an American patriot. He is loyal to the big multinational corporations that have been plundering this country, that have been grinding us into poverty, destroying American jobs and schools. He wants to send more and more money, billions of dollars into Ukraine. Well, America is falling apart. He wants to provoke a confrontation with China in the Taiwan Straits while America is falling apart. We say jobs for America, schools for America, healthcare for America, not a propaganda show, a summit of hypocrisy, a phony democracy summit to spread war propaganda. We're here to oppose it. On the microphone. Gavin, go ahead.
They tell us that all these countries, Russia, Iran, China, Venezuela, are somehow our enemy. But in reality, these countries, I mean, think about China. China has lifted 800 million people out of poverty. That doesn't hurt us. That helps us. Their fight is our fight, and this fight did not come to us. But we say, bring it on! Yeah!
Biden, George Soros, and the globalists, they want war with Russia and China because they are creating an economic alternative to the United States imperialism. Biden and the Democrats and the Republicans are leading us to a nuclear war, which the imperialist powers provoke. They're mobilizing and sending money to Ukrainian Nazis. They're voting to start a third nuclear war with Russia and China. These two parties are driving us towards a new imperialist world war, a war Americans have nothing to gain. They are playing with our lives. They're playing with American lives. The way out is not war, it's peace and development. Defund Ukraine! 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 No nuclear war! 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 I have 2 kids, and I do not want them to die in a fiery death. I just want them to have beautiful, wonderful education, good schools. We need infrastructure. We need more infrastructure. We need to build up our country. No degrowth. No war in Ukraine. We need to stop all movements toward nuclear war. For my kids, for your kids, for all children on this whole planet. Joe Biden, you are a hypocrite. Instead of going all over the world trying to impose so-called democracy, how about we have some democracy here in the United States? That's right. 20 years after our genocidal war against Iraq, not a single war criminal has even gotten so much as a ticket. The only people who have been jailed are the people who exposed the war crimes and exposed the torture. It's time to free all the political prisoners, from the left and from the right. Free all the political prisoners from the 1960s. Free the black revolutionaries. Free the January 6th political prisoners. Free Julian Assange. Drop the charges against Chairman Omali Yeshitela and his friends. Right. Hands off Uhuru. No political prisoners in the United States. Do not open your mouth to accuse any other nation of being authoritarian until you clean up your own house, Joe Biden. Stop the hypocrisy. We need regime change here in America. Our enemies are not in Tehran or Moscow or Beijing. Our enemies are in Wall Street and the city of London. Russia and China are not our enemies. 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 Democracy here. Democracy here. Democracy here. Democracy here. All right, I have a question for you folks. When was the last time Beijing took money out of your paycheck? When was the last time that Moscow sent your child to die in a war? I have a question for you. When was the last time that Tehran put your mom into a hospital and would not allow her to get out of it because you do not have enough money to pay for her health care? I don't know about you folks, but it is Washington that has imposed that on me. It is Washington that has imposed that on American families for decades. So no, our enemies are not in Tehran. Our enemies are not in Beijing. Our enemies are not in Moscow. Our enemies are not anywhere else on the planet except for sitting right here in Washington, D.C., sitting in the White House, sitting in the Congress buildings, warring across the planet for conquest. They are the ones taxing you. They are the ones causing every issue in your life. Have you ever been attacked by someone from Beijing? Have you ever been attacked by someone from Moscow? Have you ever been attacked by someone from Tehran? Have you ever been attacked by someone from any country that the United States brutally tears apart on a yearly basis? How many drone strikes can make up for the fact that the U.S. isn't making enough money? How many times can we rip countries apart and call it democracy? I don't see democracy in Libya, where we ripped their leader out of power, murdered him, and there's now open-air slavery. I don't see democracy in Iraq, where their country killed millions of people and occupy it to this day. We occupy huge swaths of Syria, huge swaths of every country on the planet that tries to stand up and build its own position in this world. My question for you is truly, Americans, when was the last time someone from these countries came and took money out of your paycheck or food out of your mouth? They never do that. Joe Biden does that. The rest of the congressmen and everyone else do that on a daily basis, every single year for decades. That's all I have to say.
Now, one thing you might notice as you're watching here is this homeless guy was kind of harassing us, and he was kind of provoking us. And you have to wonder, was he a cop or what was going on? But we just I tried to move him away from the speaker.
Ukraine, when homeless people
This is Tyler.
sleep a block from your White House. You sleep at night. I was raised in a Baptist church, and that is not what Jesus taught me to do. No! Are you a real Catholic, Joe Biden, or a fake Catholic, Joe Biden? He's a fake Catholic. What are you? An entire generation of millennials get laughed out of the bank when we try to get a loan for our wife and our 3 kids because we went to college. And instead of forgiving our debt, you forgive the debt of Silicon Valley Bank. The billionaires get their debts forgiven every time, and the working class get kicked in the face. That's right. You nailed Jesus Christ to the cross, and you can nail me up as well. But I will go down telling the truth about your hypocrisy. I pray for you, Joe Biden. I pray you find the Lord, and I pray that you wake up tomorrow and take care of your working class. Yeah. You're right. You're right. Hell yeah, Tyler. How did this stop? This was a great moment. June 30th, 2019. The leader of People's Korea and the leader of the United States shook hands. They met, the first president ever to visit the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. We had Donald Trump trying to make peace with a country that is still technically at war with the United States. Donald Trump was trying to open the door to peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. There would be hope to bring the troops home from South Korea. There would be hope that there could be denuclearization, that North Korea wouldn't feel threatened anymore, that there could be no more bombs and weapons, and the people of Korea could reunify. And Donald Trump going to People's Korea was sabotaged. It was sabotaged by John Bolton and the neocons. The same forces that got us into Ukraine, the same forces that are escalating and pushing buttons against China and Taiwan on the Taiwan Strait, the same forces that want World War III sabotaged the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. We're here to say, finish what Trump started. We want peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. We want U.S. leaders and the leaders of People's Korea to sit down. We would like to see trade between the United States and People's Korea. We would like to see those railroads in South Korea that have been built. We'd like to see them in action and see the Korean people trading with each other. We don't want war. We don't want money wasted on international confrontations. And we also don't want a police state. And at the same time that the big bankers who control Joe Biden, the Silicon Valley monopolists and fascists, the same forces that control Joe Biden, are waging a war not just around the world, but against the American people. They are driving our country into poverty. Our trains are derailing. People are breathing in deadly chemicals. The water is not properly purified. Jobs are falling apart. Schools are falling apart. It's a nightmare. They have waged a war against us. And instead of rebuilding America, they're trying to move toward a low-wage police state. That's what they're doing here in the United States. They're trying to move toward a low-wage police state. We saw what happened.
All right. Let's fast forward to when some other people were speaking. You all have heard from me. You can hear from me anytime. I'm on here talking every night. But I want to show you some of our other members. Some of our other members who spoke. Oh, here's a great person.
No depleted uranium! No depleted uranium! No depleted uranium! No depleted uranium!
I'm here to call out U.S. imperialism. President Joe Biden, stop spreading imperialism. It's one of the
from the Philippines. Bring the troops home.
No to EFTA. EFTA is an enhanced defense cooperation agreement that they claim is a temporary military base in the Philippines, but it is a real military base. So no to EFTA. No to EFTA. No to EFTA. No to EFTA. No to EFTA.
No to EFTA. Right. What's to go next? Anybody? One or two more people.
Biden sending billions of dollars to the Nazis in Ukraine, and not one penny to the people who eat poisoned in East Palestine, Ohio. We need money for water, not for war.
Money for water.
Not for war. Money for water, not for war. Money for water, not for war. Free East Palestine. 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 No more war. 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 Democracy here at home. Democracy here at home. Democracy here at home. Democracy here at home. Democracy here at home.
I want to make a point here for those of you in the audience. People here who are standing here with flags, we're not all from the same party. We don't all believe in the same thing. Some of us come from the right, some of us come from the left. Why are we here? Because we all agree that we do not want war. We do not want nuclear war going to kill our children. And we also don't want any more war spending, because every dollar that we spend in Ukraine means that there's one less dollar to feed a hungry child. Right now, 1 in 4 children are going to go to bed tonight hungry. How is this possible in one of the wealthiest countries? To tell you why. The reason is they have $7 trillion to give to the bankers, because that's who they care about, but they don't care about us. And if you're really interested in stopping the possibility of war, if you want to stop poverty and the war on the working class, then come over here and join us. Come on over.
Yeah, let's march out. Thank you very much.
Democracy at home. 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 Democracy at home.
Yeah, that was us at the White House. So that's the kind of work the Center for Political Innovation does. We are the anti-imperialists, and we are raising the alarm about the system of imperialism and how it's destroying the lives of working people around the world, how we need to stand in solidarity against the big banks and monopolies that are destroying the lives of working families. That's the kind of work that we do, and we are going to keep doing it. We've done a damn lot of it this year. So I saw we have a Rumble rant that came in on Rumble. And is there anything on the Rockfin? Let me take a look at the Rockfin. Anything on the Rockfin? Nothing yet on the Rockfin, but we do have 3 super chats that have come in. So I think what we'll do now, we'll do the roll call. I'll call you all out as I see you, names and locations. Then after that, I'll start answering people's questions. So yeah, keep me talking, right? We got a few super chats, a Rumble rant, etc. But keep me talking in the second half of our show. But who's with us tonight? We got Mark Jones in Utica, New York. Welcome, Mark. Good to have you, Mark. Good to have you with us. Mark Jones in Utica, New York is with us. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Who is with us? David in Vietnam. Welcome, David. Bendigo, Australia. David Fox is with us. Bob Troy in New York is with us. Canada, Cosmo Ray is with us. Jenny in Cincinnati. Jenny Lynn is with us. Good to have you with us, Jenny, as always. Alex in Portland. Shout out to you, Alex. You were fun to hang out with. Great guy. You're probably at work right now. I hope we're making your shift more entertaining. Alex from Brazil. Jamie in St. Paul. Laura Floyd in San Antonio, Texas. Catalonia, Spain. Pios. Detroit Anthony. Patch in Arizona. Ryan in Kansas City. Dan Niswander in Pasadena, California. Welcome, Dan. Welcome. Kirby in Chattanooga. Welcome, Kirby. USA out of Asia. John McCarthy in Chicago. Shout out to John. Shout out to John in Chicago. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Very good to have you with us, as always. We're going to show the message from the Chicago people. We're going to show that here a little bit after we do a couple super chats. We're going to show the great message, the great morning message that the Chicago members did. Greetings, Caleb from Diogenes. Good to be here. On the Rumble, we got we got Auckland, New Zealand, Kiwi Corner. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Oh, Timoshenko, and you were in the video there. Saw you in the video. You're there, and you're in St. Louis. We got Springfield GSI, Springfield, Mass. We got Seasoned Noob in China. Brendan from no particular place. All right. Great spending time with you, man. And yes, thank you for making my night a bit faster. We do our best. We do our best. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Names and locations. Anyone on the Rockfin? I don't see anybody in the Rockfin. All righty. Briggy in Pennsylvania is with us. Welcome, Briggy. Colin in Greensboro. Welcome, Colin. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Names and locations. Names and locations. Oh, before I forget, right? I'm going to download it right now. There was an epic rant by Jimmy Dore today. Absolutely epic rant from Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore, the video went up and I heard this and I'm like, my God, this is exactly what I've been trying to tell people for years. I texted Jimmy and I was like, this was amazing. And I clipped it for Twitter and I am going to put that clip on. This was epic. This was one of Jimmy Dore's best moments. I guess it's a clip from his interview he did with Tucker Carlson recently. It was utterly, utterly amazing. This epic rant from Jimmy Dore. It was really, really great. And I'm downloading it right now so I can show it here on the screen. It was, wow. I mean, Jimmy Dore, every so often, he just hits the nail on the head, and that's why they hate him, right? If, he's one of those people you're supposed to hate if you're a good liberal. And I can tell you why, because he says what needs to be said. So yeah, this is, Jimmy Dore, right? Jimmy Dore, it's 2 minutes and it was like the beginning of a question he asked Tucker Carlson or something. And it was just absolutely epic. This is as Jimmy Dore. This is Jimmy Dore, this afternoon. I mean, the video went out this afternoon and I was just blown away by how amazing it was and how, I mean, Jimmy Dore is a great guy. He's had me on his show before and I appreciate that. But I mean, my goodness, even if he'd never, if he'd never said anything good in his life and he just said this, it would be worth it because Jimmy Dore, I mean, this is so much what people need to hear. Wow. This is great. I am going to post this probably as a standalone clip, pretty soon because it needs to be heard from the heavens. Jimmy Dore
talks about white supremacy. The majority of people in America who are poor are white. And if you're going to try to lecture coal miners about white supremacy, it's going to fall flat. And if he's out there being a black activist, he could talk about white supremacy. But if you're trying to run for president and actually oppose the establishment, the last thing you should do is try to lead with trans issues or LGBTQ or because you know what? If you get a living wage for everybody, that helps everybody, especially trans and LGBTQ, black and white. If you get health care for everybody, that helps everybody, meaning black and white. So if you start to, what the establishment wants people like Cornel West to do is to keep talking about white supremacy, to keep talking about trans issues, to keep talking about LGBTQ as if they're an oppressed minority like they were in the 90s when I started comedy. Back then, they couldn't get married. They could get fired from their job. They couldn't get housing. That's all over. They have and so to keep pretending like we're living 30 years ago is exactly what the establishment wants to do. And by the way, all this talk about trans issues and talk about white, this doesn't come from the grassroots up. This comes directly from BlackRock and Larry Fink. This comes from Vanguard. This is so the most murderous companies who are raping the planet can shroud themselves in an air of virtue. And how do they do it? They do it by trans issues and LGBTQ and white supremacy and inclusion and equity and all that stuff. And that's there to keep us divided, because the only thing that scares the establishment is when people from the left and the right realize they have more in common that divides us, and they have shared enemy, and that shared enemy is the oligarchy. That's the only thing that scares them. And so if they can keep us talking about race, and if they can keep us talking about gender and ethnicity, that's a gift to them, because it keeps everybody divided. Would you?
Yeah, that was amazing. I mean, he hit the nail on the head, right? We are on here talking about it's time to stop the wars, stop the regime change wars. It's time to raise living standards for the working class, jobs, healthcare, and education. And the identity politics, the synthetic left, is a trap. Jimmy Dore hit the nail on the head. Jimmy Dore is amazing. Jimmy Dore is amazing. So now Delta V, and this leads us right to Delta V, his super chat or his Rumble rant. Delta V asks, thoughts on Tucker Carlson saying libertarian economics has been proven as a scam by private equity to hollow out the country with degrading dollar stores that signal to people no one cares about them. Well, there's a lot there, okay? The first thing about dollar stores saying that no one cares about them, that was actually, there's a store called Marks, and not M-A-R-X, but M-A-R-C-S, apostrophe S, like Mark. Mark owns it. It's Mark's store. It was in Ohio, and they criticized Mark's, I remember, because Mark's, it advertised itself as having lower prices. And it didn't completely have lower prices, but it went out of its way to look beaten up, right? To look like it was not in good condition, right? And that was a way, of subtly hinting that the prices might be less. And there was a lot of criticism of Mark's because the prices were about the same as Walmart, but Walmart tries to look clean, right? Walmart wants to look clean, but Mark's made a point of looking run down, looking dirty, not being cleaned as much, because they were convinced that would subtly tell people that their prices were lower. And I think that's what he's referring to in the second part there about the dollar stores and all of that. Right. There's, what is it? Dollar Tree, Family Dollar. There's a bunch of those stores. And I've gone to them. They have them here in my neighborhood. Right. We've got a few here in my neighborhood in Brooklyn. Those kind of rundown stores that have stuff for very marked down low rates. Right. And that people have talked about how, I guess some of those stores go out of their way to not lower the prices necessarily, but cultivate an image of being more run down, more quote unquote ghetto, or more, just more torn apart, more ragged, and that hurts the self-esteem of the people who shop there. And it's a marketing technique, but honestly, the people who go there, it kind of communicates to them, you're not important. You're a poor person. You're not valued. You don't get to shop at a fancier store. There's been a lot of criticism of these stores around those lines. It's been a while since I heard anyone talk about that, but I think that's the first part of what Delta V is getting at. I don't know exactly how that's linked to libertarian economics. What I will say is that, Tucker Carlson is interesting politically. Now, I know for a long time, Tucker Carlson worked with Pat Buchanan. And Pat Buchanan is a traditionalist Roman Catholic, and he's a paleo-conservative. And he's a Republican, but he ran for president with the Reform Party, historically. And Pat Buchanan, he advocates some policies that, that regular conservatives that favor free market economics don't advocate. For example, protectionist trade was a big thing that Pat Buchanan advocated. Pat Buchanan also believed that the government should give a cash bonus to families who had children. He believed that, he wrote a book called The Death of the West, where he argued that the birth rate among Americans was decreasing, and that was a huge mistake, and that the government should be going out of its way to encourage birth. And these were policies that are more consistent with the Catholic conservative economics that he advocated than with the free market American conservatism. I have a book that a friend gave to me over there on the shelf, and it's called The Creation of American Conservatism. What does it mean to be a conservative in America? What does it mean? It basically just means the worship of capitalism at this point, right? I mean, historically, being a conservative meant you were more religious, meant you were more traditional in the way you viewed things. Historically, being a conservative, in some ways, it meant that you were, you looked to the past and the ancient ways, the traditions of the past. But American conservatism, basically, it's just kind of anti-communism, thinking that liberals who want to enact progressive reforms are secretly communists. There's elements of social conservatism thrown in there. They talk like they're a little more Christian. They talk like they don't like young people and their snotty attitudes. But American conservatism has no real meaning. Whereas, the trad Catholics of paleo, the paleo conservative trad Catholics, right? They're conservatives, they're right-wingers. A lot of them are anti-Semites, too. I think E. Michael Jones, who worked with Pat Buchanan over the years, that guy just hates Jews. A lot of them are anti-Semites. And then there is an economic theory they call distributism, which is a kind of a weird, like, Catholic socialism, kind of. I think it was advocated by a guy named G.K. Chesterton. But so for a long time, I suspected that Tucker Carlson was one of these. I thought he was a trad Catholic. I found out that's not true. Tucker Carlson is not a traditionalist Catholic, but because he had worked with Pat Buchanan, he was probably heavily exposed to that wing of conservatism, that traditionalist Catholic conservatism, which is not, not free market so much. It kind of breaks with standard American conservative thinking. It's very anti-communist. In some cases, it's very anti-Semitic, but it's not. But Tucker Carlson is just Tucker Carlson at the end of the day. I mean, honestly, I think Tucker Carlson is a work in progress. Tucker Carlson is a work in progress. He is a Republican. And right now, the Republicans, for whatever reason, are the dissident, faction among the imperialists. During the late Cold War, the Republicans were the hardline imperialists. The Democrats were the dissident faction. Now that's flipped. Now the Democrats are the hardline imperialists and the Republicans are the dissident faction. And I remember during the Bush years, when I was first protesting the war in Iraq, I would go to those anti-war protests, and they would be, there would be liberals, people who want MoveOn.org, people who wanted to vote for the Democrats, but it was communist groups that were generally stage managing the rallies during the Iraq War years. The big anti-war coalition was called United for Peace and Justice, and it was quietly run by DSA and the Communist Party USA. Judith LeBlanc, who is Native American and is a member of the National Board of the Communist Party, she was the director of United for Peace and Justice. There was Leslie Kagan. She was also one of the big leaders of United for Peace and Justice, Leslie Kagan. And that was United for Peace and Justice. They were the bigger coalition that would have Democratic congressmen speak at their rallies. And then there was a smaller coalition that, that was very good at getting the permits and stuff. It was called the Answer Coalition, Act Now, Stop War and End Racism. That was run by the Workers' World Party. And now PSL, broke away and formed, now it's run by PSL, Party of Socialism and Liberation. And then there was this other group called Not in Our Name. And they had ads in the New York Times, and they had the Earth flag was like their logo, and they had an ad in the New York Times. They got a lot of celebrities and Hollywood actors and others to sign opposing the war in Iraq and opposing torture, etc. And they were called Not in Our Name, and that was quietly run by the Revolutionary Communist Party. The RCP, they ran that. And those were the groups, those were the groups that protested the war in Iraq. But at those rallies, it was communists that were running it. A lot of times liberals would go to it. There'd be MoveOn.org literature there. There'd be people there that were planning to run, vote for Democrats, campaign for Democrats, and then, but the Libertarian Party would be there. Alex Jones. I remember I would see Alex Jones at those rallies. I was just a high school kid. I'd go to I was like a college freshman. I would go to these rallies, and this fat guy with an accent walking around talking like this. I think George W. Bush is a communist. He used to be a Trotskyite. They're neocons. I don't like all these gay people at the White House. I'm Alex Jones. Alex Jones would be walking around, right? The LaRoucheites, right? They'd be there. They'd have their choirs that were singing. It was just kind of a free-for-all, libertarians, and it was just anybody who didn't agree. Anyone who was at odds with the establishment gathered there because that, the Iraq War was what the establishment was doing. Europe was against it. The bulk of the world was against it, but the American ruling class was for it. And so Alex Jones and the libertarians and the LaRouche people and the Democrat, more radical Democrats and, the communist groups, and the communist groups because they were the opposition during the Cold War because America was against communism, right? And so communists were the opposition. American wars were fought against communists generally. So the communists kind of were stage managing the whole thing. And it was just kind of this free-for-all, right, of people that were against the establishment. And, it was weird as there was no cancel culture back in those days. It was weird. It was much smaller. I mean, very few people paid attention to it. It was much more fringe. Very, these protests were locked out of the mainstream of political society. But they were, they were, how do I put this? They were, they were, in fact, these protests were indeed, they were the official opposition, and they included a lot of different forces, and, they were just kind of the fringe. And it was leftists who were running it, but it was a place that all the people at odds with the establishment went. That's the point I'm making. And I feel like now it's the Republican spaces that you're going to find all kinds of dissidents, right? It's going to be in conservative spaces because the Democrats are the mainstream. Right, you're going to find a lot of leftists that are at odds with the establishment in Republican kind of spaces. They're going to be hanging out with anti-vaxxers. They're going to be hanging out with, libertarians, Rage Against the War Machine, and that because, the so-called left is now the dominant faction among the imperialists. I'm trying to see if I can find you the name, Not in Our Name, Pledge of Resistance song, right? Right. I want to see if I can find that for you. Because somebody recorded a song of the Not in Our Name. The Not in Our Name organization, they had the Pledge of Resistance that they put together as a song. Right. And yeah, that was Not in Our Name was like the Revolutionary Communist Party's front group. And they had, and there was a kind of a neat song that had been recorded. And I wonder if I can, yes, here it is. Wow. Look at that. I found it. I will put on the Not in Our Name Pledge of Resistance song. It was just this pledge. It was this statement they wrote in the New York Times. It got all these celebrities to sign it. And then somebody wrote it to music, right? It was kind of hippies, I think, wrote the musical version of the Pledge of Resistance from the, it was really the Revolutionary Communist Party that did it. It was the RCP, but they got a lot of celebrities to sign on to it. And it was just this pledge that they wrote, and that they had all these people sign. They took an ad out in the New York Times. And then somebody named Shelley Dottie and Andrea Pritchett, they decided to put it to music. So I'll put that on for you. Why not? Right. We can listen to the Pledge of Resistance. Here it is. Not in Our Name, Pledge of Resistance. We'll put it on. It's 2 minutes. It's just the song version of the Pledge of Resistance from Not in Our Name, which was one of the big anti-war groups back in the day. All right, here we go. But any more super chats, keep them coming in because I got plenty to say. I saw the one about Joe S. So there we go. We'll talk about that.
That has people living in the United States. It's our responsibility to resist the injustices done by our government in our name. Not in our name. more deaths, no more transfusions of blood for oil. Not in our name will you invade countries, bomb civilians, kill more children, letting history take its course over the graves of the nameless. Not in our name will you erode the very freedoms that you have came to fight for. Not by our hands will we supply the weapons and funding for the annihilation of families on foreign soil. Not by our mouths will we let fear silence us. Not by our hearts will we allow all peoples or countries to be deemed evil. Not by our will and not in our name. We pledge resistance, we pledge alliance with those who have come under attack for voicing opposition to the war, for their religion or ethnicity. We pledge to make common cause with the people of the world to bring about justice, freedom and peace. Another world is possible, and we pledge to make it real. Another world is possible, and we pledge to make it real. Another world is possible, and we pledge to make it real.
Yeah, that was the Not in Our Name pledge put to music. But anyway, I've got some super chats to answer. So the first one, Putin banned LGBT groups out of fear of a fifth column. I think that's an exaggeration. I don't think that's exactly what happened. I think that, that there's a lot of NGOs that promote LGBT rights in Russia because Russia, the state religion is the Russian Orthodox Church, and they are against that. And there's many Russians that feel that's a Western thing. It's a Western attack on the family. And, there's many Russian communists who feel that way, right? And it's not just, we kind of take for granted the social liberalism of the West, but there's a lot of people around the world that see things differently, and I think that in the context of the war that is happening, there are a lot of these LGBT groups that have been weaponized, to destabilize Russia, etc. And that Putin is, he's got to rally the country. They're trying to defend their country from a foreign attack from these Ukrainian Nazis that are trying to destroy Russia, that want to break apart Russia. We got the West talking, we got the West talking about decolonize Russia, meaning they basically want to take apart, the country. And so they're rallying around their traditions, etc. I personally am in favor of LGBT rights. I think that there's nothing wrong with people being LGBT, but I know people that are LGBT in Russia and they're fine. They're not being rounded up and killed. There's LGBT bars, and there are gay people in Russia. I know some of them that are gay, and they're gay in Russia, and everyone knows they're gay, whatever. So I think that's a little bit of an exaggeration what you just said there, right? But I honestly don't know the specifics of the new legislation. I do know about there was the homosexual propaganda law that's basically just outlawed foreign funded NGOs that were trying to destabilize Russia in the name of LGBT rights. I don't know the specifics, and they're in a war at this point. Civil liberties tend to be eroded. The U.S. Constitution says that if Congress declares a state of war, a lot of your freedoms go away. So, I am for LGBT rights. People should be allowed to be who they are. If you want to be trans, you can be trans. If you want to be gay, you can be gay. Your sex life is not my business. Live and let live. You know what I mean? That's where I'm at. But that said, I don't like the idea of, this idea that, well, now we all have to hate Russia because of that. Well, I think LGBT stuff is Russia's business, not America's business. That's my opinion. All righty. Cecil Rhodes, Racism and Colonialism, tells you everything you need to know about the Rhodes Scholar and Russia hater Rachel Maddow. Oh, but you know how many people in the establishment are Rhodes Scholars. Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar. The administrations of the Democrats and the Republicans, the Council on Foreign Relations. I mean, everybody practically high up in the government is a Rhodes Scholar. The Rhodes Scholar program is one of the main ways that the Anglo-American establishment, that they vet people, they cultivate people. You know, just look at how many Rhodes Scholars are up in the Democrats and Republican administrations. They're everywhere. So yeah, it's not just that. The other thing is that Cecil Rhodes, I often will quote Cecil Rhodes because in Lenin's book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, Lenin quotes Cecil Rhodes describing how not only is imperialism about making super profits for the big monopolies, it's about stabilizing the imperialist homelands. And I will read to you a quote from Cecil Rhodes that is quoted by Lenin in his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. This is from Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes, the big colonizer of Africa, the British imperialist, the founder of the Rhodes Scholar Program. This is what he said. I was in the East End of London, a working class quarter, yesterday, and I attended a meeting of the unemployed, and I listened to their wild speeches, which were just a cry for bread, bread, bread. And on my way home, I pondered over the scene, and I became ever more convinced of the importance of imperialism. My cherished idea is the solution for the social problem. In order to save the 40 million inhabitants of the United Kingdom from civil war, we colonial statesmen must acquire new lands to settle the surplus population and provide new markets for the goods produced in the factories and the mines. The empire, as I have always said, is a bread and butter question. If you want to avoid a civil war, you must become imperialists. And that was Cecil Rhodes. And he was basically saying that by super exploiting Africa, which was what he was all about, he's the guy they named Rhodesia after, he's responsible for the death of literally millions of Africans. And you read about, how they would go to African villages with their machine guns, just kill everybody, right? It was just Cecil Rhodes was a brutal mass murdering colonizer. He's responsible for, they always give you a body count of communism. Somebody do the body count of Cecil Rhodes, right? He was saying that part of what imperialism was about was buying class peace at home, right? If they could send English people all over the world to act as settlers and slave drivers, right? If they could force these countries that they took over to accept their products, right? Then they wouldn't have a glut on the market of overproduction, right? When the British Empire went to India, they burned the textile looms and forced them to import British cloth. And that imperialism was largely about stabilizing the British homeland and preventing a working class revolution. That if the imperialists hadn't been able to spread their tentacles all over the planet and set up their financial system, they would have had a big crisis of overproduction and there would have been a workers' revolution, right? And, just as Lenin spends the book Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, spelling it out, in that book, he quotes one of the top imperialists, one of the founders of the British imperial, free trade system, saying exactly that. And that quote is so important. We use that in the Saxton Lectures. Saxton Lecture number 2, we start out with that because you have one of the imperialists basically explaining the purpose of imperialism. So it's a really, really important quotation from Cecil Rhodes. I wish people could read that. Lenin's theory of imperialism was first articulated by the actual British imperialist himself, Cecil Rhodes. So thanks for raising that, John McCarthy. It's important. These are quotes people need to know. All right. The U.S. announced a military coalition of countries to stop the Houthi blockade on the Red Sea. With the Houthis not backing down, is war inevitable? The Houthis, the Palestinians are in awe of the Houthis, right? They have decided they are going to war with Israel. They are blocking ships. They are shooting missiles. They are going to war with Israel. If there's any group of people in the Arab world who are standing in solidarity with the Palestinians, it's the Houthis. They are they are at war with Israel. They are seizing Israeli ships. They are shooting the missiles. They are at war with Israel. Now, the Houthis allegedly have ties to Iran, right? I think that's exaggerated. They allegedly have ties to Iran. They are Shia Muslims, right? They're Zaydi Shias. They're not 12er Shias like the Iranians are, but they are Shias. They're not Sunnis. So I mean, is war inevitable? I mean, there's already a war in Yemen. The USA has, through the proxy of Saudi Arabia, been at war with Yemen for how long? For at least since 2015. So, I mean, there's no shocker. There's already been US drone strikes in Yemen. So, I mean, if the USA were to actually send its military into Yemen, that wouldn't be that different from what's happening now. There's been, the Saudi army with US-made weapons, getting air support and satellite support from the US military, with US generals in Riyadh directing Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's like, is war inevitable? There's already a war. There's been a war going on in Yemen since 2015. And really, there's been a war in Yemen since 2003, right? I mean, since 2003, the Houthis have been engaging in armed self-defense, been waging guerrilla warfare in the mountains. The whole country started having a war in 2015. I mean, there's the USA is heavily involved in that war. Drone strikes, military support, Saudi proxies. The Saudi military, they have the 4th largest military budget of any country in the world. They've already invaded Yemen and occupied a bunch of it with Pakistani mercenaries. And so the idea that there might be actual US troops in Yemen, that would be an escalation. But is war inevitable? There's already war in Yemen. The USA is in everything but name at war with the Houthis, right? What I think is interesting is probably the reason if the USA does actually send actual US military forces to Yemen, the main factor in that wouldn't be what they're doing in the Red Sea. The main factor would be the Saudis don't want to fight them anymore. And I think that's the case. The Saudis, they pretend to be anti-Israel. And to some degree, they are. I mean, there is a lot of Saudi funding of Hamas. There are a lot of wealthy Saudi people that do support the Palestinians. The Saudi government, not so much. But on Saudi television is full of anti-Israel stuff and such. So, Saudi Arabia, if they were to attack Yemen right now, they would lose their credibility because they say that they're against Israel. And the Houthis are fighting Israel harder than anybody. So at this point, the Saudis are probably going to have to de-escalate almost all military operations against the Houthis. So the USA is going to have to do it itself. The USA and Israel are going to have to start doing what the Saudis were doing for them before, And the Saudis already have de-escalated. The war in Yemen has been largely demobilizing since the special military operation began because Saudi Arabia isn't willing to go all in with the United States. And so, I think that, yeah, I mean, that would be a disaster. I mean, that would be bad. Let me put it this way. It would be bad if the USA were to send actual troops to Yemen. It'd be bad if Israel sent its forces to Yemen. But they've already been at war with Saudi Arabia since 2015. I mean, the USA is basically in everything but name at war with the Houthis already. So, it would be bad. I would oppose it. And I oppose Saudi Arabia in Yemen. And I risked my life trying to bring medical aid to Yemen in 2015, created an international incident. You can read the Reuters articles about me. John Kerry apparently mentioned my name on a phone call. So, and he was mad that I was on the ship to Yemen. He was furious that Javid Zarif had snuck it in behind his back and not told him he put some quote unquote Occupy Wall Street kid on a ship to Yemen. So, I'm all for the Houthis. The Houthis are great anti-imperialists. They're fighting for their people. They want to raise their people up out of poverty. And they're the ones that are fighting Israel right now. Outside of Gaza, where Hamas is fighting Israel, the main people that are at war with Israel right now are the Houthis. So there's no question about it. And will that lead to an escalation? It could, right? But the Houthis are right. They're fighting for economic development of their country. They support Venezuela. They support Iran. They support Cuba. There's communists that are part of the Houthi coalition. They never tell you that, right? But the Houthis are Shia Muslims, right? The tribe, right? They're called Ansar Allah. That's the name of the organization. They're Shia Muslims. They're based in the northern region. They're tribal. They're mountain folks. They live up in the mountains, and they are fanatically religious. They practice, a very kind of obscure form of Shia Islam, where they worship all the way up to Imam Zaid, right? And they have a very, old-fashioned, I mean, they're like, trying to think of it, right? So you have like Protestants in America, right? And then you have like Jehovah's Witnesses. That's kind of like what they are, right? Among Muslims, you have Sunnis and Shias, but most Shias are what you call 12ers. But then there's some obscure types of Shias, right? There's Alawites. Alawites are technically Shias, but they only recognize one Imam after the Prophet Muhammad, Imam Ali. And then they have a thing about the angel was originally supposed to visit Ali, and got confused and visited Muhammad by accident. And they think Imam Ali, was intended to be the prophet. And they have adopted a lot of Christian rituals, and they don't go into mosques. They have secret prayer rooms in their house because Imam Ali was killed in a mosque. So they don't go into mosques. And it is they're technically Shias, but they're their own thing. And the same for Zaydis, right? Zaydis, they're technically Shias, but they pray like Sunnis. They don't recognize 12 imams. They recognize up to, I think it's 6 imams after Imam Zaid. They pray like Sunnis do. They also, Zaydis, the Houthis, they believe that it is a sin for a man not to own a gun. Which they never tell you this, right? And, keep your rifle by your side, right? Second Amendment all the way. They'll never tell you this, but the Houthis, right? They show you these pictures of the Houthis, and you're supposed to think, oh my God, scary brown people with guns. They must all be terrorists. Well, this is their religion, right? This is their religion. Every time you see a picture of the Houthis, this is, it's going to look like this. They're always going to show you Houthis waving guns around, right? Whenever you see them, right? They're guys in turbans and they're waving their guns around, right? This every picture that you ever see of the Houthis, they look like this, right? Right? Why? Their religion says that if a man, a patriarch, like a father figure, a man doesn't have a gun, he is committing a sin, right? There's a line, something the Prophet Muhammad is quoted as saying, I believe, about a man must protect his family, a man must have a sword. So they believe if you do not have a gun, you have committed a sin against Allah, right? That it is your biblical duty to own a firearm. So the war in Yemen, it basically started in 2003. In 2003, they were up in the mountains in Yemen, and they were just doing their religious thing. And they were really against the U.S. invasion of Iraq. And they were against the invasion of Iraq, and they were having anti-U.S. rallies where they would burn the American flag and they would chant death to America. And they were really against the invasion of Iraq. And the Yemeni government got a little bit scared because they were all waving their guns around. And so it tried to take their guns away. It said, no, you guys, that's a little dangerous. It's a little scary. You guys are having your rallies and you're saying death to America and you got guns. That's scary. They tried to take their guns away. Well, you can't take their guns away because they believe that it is a part of their religion. You have to have a gun. And when they tried to disarm them, they took up arms against the government. They said, we will, they basically said to the Yemeni president, President Salah, who was the president until the Arab Spring, they said, from my cold, dead hands, from my cold, dead hands. And that's why at all the rallies, every time there's a Houthi rally, they're always waving their guns around, right? They're always waving their guns around because that's what they're saying. Like the whole war started, their war with the Yemeni government, which is now they are the Yemeni government. Their war with the Yemeni government started because they tried to take their guns away. So, that's what you need to understand. That's why all the pictures show them waving their guns around. It's not because they're crazy bloodthirsty extremists. It's because that's their religion. That they believe that you have to have a gun. So, what happened was they were just fighting against the government, and they were, because the government was trying to take their guns away, they took up arms and seized control of their mountain regions. And, when the Yemeni government would send people in the regions to come take their guns away, they'd be up in the mountains and they'd shoot them. And, they took control of certain regions. But then in 2011, the Arab Spring happened. Okay. The Arab Spring happened all over Yemen. Many different people protested and revolted, and the dictator Salah stepped down. And when the dictator Salah stepped down, they started writing a new constitution for Yemen. And they had these things called revolutionary assemblies. And it was people of many different backgrounds in Yemen who joined the revolutionary assemblies. And some of the people in the revolutionary assemblies were what they call the Southern Movement. And the Southern Movement in Yemen are people that want to bring back the Democratic People's Republic of Yemen. During the Cold War, half of Yemen was communist. It was the DPRY, the Democratic People's Republic of Yemen. And there's many people in Yemen, in the north and the south, that feel that they're not the same country. That South Yemen is, that's where it's more industrialized, and North Yemen is where the mountains are. And there's a lot of people that say, look, we're technically the same country, but we have a different language. We have a different dialect of the language. We have a different culture. We have different religions, and that we need to set it up so the people in the south can be communist again, and the people in the north can be ultra religious again. And so the Southern Movement is a group of people in southern Yemen who want to have communism back, and they're called the Southern Movement. There's also a lot of people in Yemen that are Arab nationalists. They're either Nasserists, they follow Abdul Nasser, the president of Egypt, or they follow Ba'athist Arab socialism, which is, that's the movement, that was, Saddam Hussein in Iraq and Bashar Assad in Syria, right? So there's Ba'athist Arab socialists. There's Houthis that are Sunni, Shia Muslims. There's the Southern Movement, they're called, that want to have communism, a Marxist-Leninist communist government back in the north or in the south again. And then there's what you call the Saleh movement. And that's people that liked Saleh, the dictator Saleh, who's kind of, he believed all Yemenis were one country. He was against communism, right? Saleh, who was deposed during the Arab Spring. There was all kinds of different people, right? So then the Saudis, they picked this guy named Mansour Hadi, who is just a businessman, a wealthy guy who happens to be Yemeni, but he does business with Saudi Arabia. And they appointed him the president of Yemen. And Mansour Hadi showed up, and they had an election with only one candidate on the ballot, and it was Mansour Hadi. And they had a fake election. And all the people from the Houthis and all the people from the Ba'athist party and the Nasserist party and the Southern Movement, all kinds of people in Yemen are like, you got to be fucking kidding me, right? You can't have an election with one candidate on the ballot. And Saudi Arabia said, we're the rich ones. We have all the money. You do what we say. Well, the Houthis then went to all these different groups and said, hey, let's not recognize it. So, starting in 2012, after the fake election, the forces in Yemen that were opposed to Mansour Hadi got together and they formed an army. And of course, the Houthis already had all the guns and they already had their own armies. They were kind of the center of it. And they formed what they call the Revolutionary Committee, and they seized the capital of Yemen. They marched in and they took power. And the Revolutionary Committee took power in Yemen, and Mansour Hadi fled. And that was the beginning of the war. And so, then Saudi Arabia invaded Yemen to try and, restore Mansour Hadi, and all the parties split. Some of the Nasserists are so afraid of the Houthis. They think the Houthis are so radical and extreme. They supported the invasion, right? And you'll get very confusing information. On Wikipedia, it lists all the political parties that support Saudi Arabia. And that's not accurate, right? Because the Houthis control a huge chunk of Yemen. And in that area, there are Baathists that are part of the Revolutionary Committee, and there are Nasserists that are part of the Revolutionary Committee. There's the Southern Movement. There are people from the Ba'ath Party and people from the Nasser Party and people from the Southern Movement who are against the Houthis who support Saudi Arabia, but they're not the majority, right? And that all these political parties, they have people at the top who are close to Saudi Arabia who claim they represent them, but then they also have, people on the ground. And it's a coalition government. What they want for Yemen is Yemen's never going to adopt a Shia government. Most of the people in Yemen are Sunni, and many of the people in the south are atheists or are secular, as they call it, where they're religious, but they're not like super religious, right? Yemen's not going to become an Islamic republic. What they want is that the Houthis should be able to have in northern Yemen, they should be able to have a Houthi government. In the regions where they are the majority, they should be able to have their Shia Muslim government. And South Yemen should be able to have a communist government, Marxist-Leninist, right? And every region, the different tribes with different cultures and different ideologies should be able to, they want a federal republic, right? They want states' rights, basically. They want, you know, the Houthis can live their way, the communists can live their way, the other people in the country, the Sunnis, can live their way. That's what they're fighting for. And they all want public ownership of oil. And that's a big part of what they're fighting for. The oil in Yemen is basically private, and it's not being utilized. It's in the ground. They want a government to take power that starts using the oil to start developing the country, building schools, educating, because Yemen is one of the poorest countries in the entire world. Yemen is one of the poorest countries in the entire world. And, the people there are like, their life expectancy is very short. They're hungry. They live in the mountains. They live without running water. They live without electricity. And they've got all this oil. And they're like, let's just start using our oil to make ourselves wealthier. And so that's the Revolutionary Committee. And that's who is fighting against the Israelis. And the Houthis are the center of the Revolutionary Committee. But they know that they don't represent the majority of the people of Yemen. They're never going to run all of Yemen. They kind of want to be like Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah is not running all of Lebanon. There's a chunk of Lebanon that has their religious background as Shia, and they run that. That's what the Houthis want. All right. I have studied this in depth, and I know a bit about Yemen. So, yeah, I just thought I would answer that. But there you go. So anyway, now I'm going to show the video from the Midwest meetup of CPI. This was the morning message that the Midwestern comrades made. They had a Midwest CPI meetup yesterday with all our members, and they made a morning message. So I'm going to put it on. Just a short message. It's John McCarthy of Chicago who's speaking, but you can see all of our members there. It's awesome. Here they go.
Good morning, everybody. This is John McCarthy and the Greater Chicago, I should say the Chicago-Milwaukee Center for Political Innovation chapter. This is our first in-person meetup with all of us here, or most of us here. And this was inspired by the recent CPI National Convention, the first national convention of CPI in Portland, Oregon. And we realized we have a lot of people here in the Midwest region that are enthusiastic members of the Center for Political Innovation, and we should start coordinating and make it official. So we are now the official Midwest local. We encourage the rest of you watching this who are members of the Center for Political Innovation to do the same thing in your areas, off of the internet in real life, out of the movement to the masses. So we formalized we're going to be meeting every month. We're learning, or some people have volunteered to learn to teach the Saxon lectures, all 9 of them. And we're getting ready for some interventions, like at the Jimmy Dore Midwest Tour and at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee and the Democratic National Convention here in Illinois. And we're going to recruit and expand. And we're building a community. And that's what CPI is all about. Well, we're about bringing socialism to America and getting the United States to join with BRICS. But we're also about building a community. That's how we're going to do it, is by building a community. And we've taken an important first step here in Chicago today. And we encourage all of you who, if you're a CPI supporter and not a member, we encourage you to become a member. And if you are a member and you're an internet-only member so far, we encourage you to organize a community in real life and intervene into the population. And over and out. And because it's me.
Dare to struggle! Dare to win! Dare to struggle! Dare to win! Dare to struggle!
And because it's me, I have to end with Uhuru!
There you go. Yeah, and John, he did send a super chat about how Jimmy Dore is touring the Midwest soon, and that'll be great. We'll be at the shows, and if you can go to the Jimmy Dore shows, bring some CPI palm cards with you, right? Because the people that like Jimmy Dore are the people that are going to like us, So, yeah, if you're a CPI member or a friend and you are going to a Jimmy Dore show, get some palm cards from us because we want to get to people at the Jimmy Dore show and get them organized. All right. Today is Joseph S.'s birthday, obviously referring to Joe Stalin. And what were his best accomplishments? Making Russia into an industrial superpower, defeating the Nazis, supporting the Black liberation movement in the United States. There would be no Black freedom struggle in the United States. I mean, not there. I mean, there obviously would be, but not to the degree that there was. It was Stalin who made that happen. I will never forget this. This was one of the most educational things that ever happened to me. As I was in high school, I grew up in a really small town in Ohio, and I had a history teacher who loved to go through the archives of the little town that I grew up in and the town newspaper. And he brought me an article from about 1951 in my town's newspaper. Right? This is while the Korean War is going on, while Stalin is still alive running the Soviet Union. It was from my little town in Ohio, and it was on the newspaper. The front page, it said, "Take that, Uncle Joe. Take that, Uncle Joe." That was the headline. What was it? Well, the article showed that the first Black family had bought a house in my town. And it had a picture of this Black family that had just bought a house. And the article began with a quote from Stalin about how America was racist and how it oppresses the Black people. And the article was saying, well, clearly this isn't true. Clearly Stalin's full of shit because we allowed a Black family to buy a house in Orville. And I read that, and that shows you how important what Stalin did was, right? The fact that that would be the front page of the newspaper in a tiny little town in Ohio. They had to prove Stalin wrong. Look, we allowed a Black family to own a house, so clearly Stalin's wrong. That shows you how important what the Soviet Union did. When they brought William L. Patterson to the United Nations to give a speech condemning Jim Crow segregation called "We Charge Genocide." When Emmett Till was lynched in 1954 and the Soviet Union took the image of this mutilated, Black teenager's body and spread it all over the world. When the Soviet Union sent guns and weapons to anti-colonial struggles in Africa. And when the United States would say to people in Africa, don't work with the Soviets, they're a bunch of, evil dictators. And they would say, oh, really? And you're the land of freedom of democracy. And they'd show that picture of Emmett Till. That gave such a huge, huge boost to the Black freedom struggle. The fact that the Communist Party did everything it could to free the Scottsboro Nine, right? This was before World War II. 9 young Black men were caught. They were on a train car. And they were in the Black segregated train car, and a white prostitute went into the train car. She didn't even have sex with them, I don't think. She just went into the train car. And so they arrested all 9 of these young Black men and were going to electrocute them, give them the death penalty for rape because this white prostitute had been in their train car. And they were going to give them the death penalty. And the Communist Party raised awareness, free the Scottsboro Nine. They had rallies in Moscow for the Scottsboro Nine. And that all kinds of communists from the United States went to the South to support the Scottsboro Nine. And eventually the Supreme Court stepped in and freed the Scottsboro Nine, and they didn't get the death penalty, right? This was in the age of Jim Crow. This is before World War II. And the Soviet Union said, we are going to do everything we can to free the Scottsboro Nine. And they did. The fact that Langston Hughes, the beloved African-American poet, he went to the Soviet Union. He met with Stalin. Stalin even gave him money to try and make a propaganda movie about racism. He never actually finished the project. But the civil rights movement in America, what finally got going in 1955, right? In 1955, the Montgomery bus boycott, that wasn't communists, right? That was Democrats. That was the Democratic Party, the United Auto Workers, and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But that would never have happened if Stalin had not been beating the drum from 1928, when he wrote the Black Belt thesis of the Communist International and declared that Black people are a colonized people within U.S. borders. From 1928 till the day he died, Stalin was constantly talking about how Black people in America are oppressed, about how America is a racist country. The Communist Party raised the slogan, organize the South. They sent all their members down to the South to try and organize against Jim Crow segregation. I mean, you have no idea. So, we're here in the United States, and obviously Stalin was on the other side of the world, but There would never have been a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. if it hadn't been for Stalin. Okay. And that's what you need to understand, right? That if it hadn't been for the Soviet Union, if it hadn't been for Stalin, your life would be very different. You know, if you're a white person, right? Have you ever collected unemployment? That's because of Stalin. That's because of the fact that in the 1930s, the labor movement exploded. I always tell people this. What was the biggest strike in American history? The biggest strike in American history was in 1877. And do you know what we won from that strike? Nothing. It was the biggest strike. Railroad workers in 1877, led by Eugene V. Debs. They went on strike, and hundreds of them got killed, and they didn't get anything. They didn't win anything. The U.S. set up a system of armories around the country in case there was ever another big strike like that. They didn't win anything. But in 1934, right? 1934, you're on the list. There was a general strike in San Francisco. There was a general strike in Minneapolis. There was a general strike in Toledo, Ohio. South Carolina was shut down by sharecropper and textile workers' strikes. They declared a state of emergency. And right after that, Roosevelt started hiring the unemployed like crazy. And the strikes that happened in 1934 were way smaller than the railroad strike of 1877. So why did the railroad strike of 1877 win nothing? And the strike wave of 1934 win so much, right? Eventually, Roosevelt created unemployment insurance, created Social Security. Why? Because in 1934, those workers who went on strike, they were aligned with 1/6 of the world. There was 1/6 of the world that was on their side. I wish people could understand this. When they went on strike in 1934, when truck drivers and dock workers and auto light workers and sharecroppers in South Carolina and textile workers went on strike in 1934, there was 1/6 of the planet that was on their side. And they were carrying hammers and sickles. And they were led by the Communist Party of the United States that was part of the Communist International. And the American government was way, way more scared of that strike, of those strikes, than they were of the strikes of 1877. Right? And when that strike wave of 1934 happened, Roosevelt said, I better start giving working people something. So if you've ever collected unemployment insurance, right? Or if you've ever driven on a highway, right? Have you ever flown to New York City? Did you go to LaGuardia Airport? They built LaGuardia Airport in 1935. Roosevelt hired all these unemployed people and had them go build an airport because communists were leading strikes everywhere and people were hungry and he was afraid of a communist revolution. I mean, have you ever been to a post office? Like almost every post office in this country was built because of Stalin. Like, you have no idea what Stalin did for you, right? And they want to sit there and tell you, oh, Stalin was just an evil mass murderer. Look, Stalin wasn't perfect. I'm sure Stalin did a lot of bad things in his life, right? I mean, I don't know how you could be Stalin and not, in the situation that he was in, 27 million people died in World War II. 15 different countries invaded them after the Russian Revolution. We have no idea the circumstances they were in. But if you're an American, Stalin did a shit ton for you, okay? Stalin directly impacted your life. If you ever collected food stamps, you can thank Joe Stalin for that, right? If you ever collected unemployment insurance, if you're an older person, you're collecting Social Security, you can thank Joe Stalin for that. Right? You go to LaGuardia Airport, you could drive on Key West Highway, right? You go to a nice fancy post office. That's Stalin, right? You're not speaking German. That's because of Stalin, right? And no one talks about this. And after the Soviet Union fell, what came after the fall of the Soviet Union? NAFTA. What came after the fall of the Soviet Union? Getting rid of welfare as we know it. The prison industrial complex. They never would have done that when the Soviet Union existed. They never would have done that in Stalin's day. But when the Soviet Union fell, they thought they could get away with it. They breathed a sigh of relief and they said, oh, thank God, communism's gone. Whew, now we can start locking up black people by the millions. Now we can take take welfare as we know it and get rid of it. Now we can sign the NAFTA and start sending all the jobs to Mexico because, hey, we don't have to worry about Stalin anymore. We don't have to worry about the Soviet Union anymore. So, I mean, we can talk about all the achievements of Stalin, defeating the Nazis, industrializing the USSR, but if you're an American, you owe Stalin a debt of gratitude, right? And even if you think Stalin was an evil murderer, you should acknowledge this. Even if you believe every lie against him, you must acknowledge civil rights for African Americans, the modern civil rights movement, unemployment insurance, Social Security, the Works Progress Administration that built so much of our infrastructure, food stamps, the Wagner Act that made it legal, that made it a federal law that you have the right to go on strike, the Wagner Act, the Fair Labor Standards Act, that's all Stalin, right? The fact that we're all not speaking German and the Nazis didn't win World War II, you can thank Stalin and the Soviet people who gave 27 million of their lives to defeat the Nazis, right? So, and since the death of Stalin and since the fall of the USSR, so much of that has been eroded. And now with Russia and China rising again, it's coming back and the revolutionary energy is coming back. So, yeah, I just wanted to get that out of my system. And I guess, hey, we got a couple more super chats to answer, but since it is Stalin's birthday, right? Why don't we put on the Ballad of Joe Stalin, right? The Ballad of Joe Stalin, right? So Ewan McCool, who was a British communist folk singer, he wrote the Ballad of Joe Stalin, but I couldn't find, for a long time, no one could find a recording of it. So my friend Paul, who's a friend of CPI, folk singer, he took the song of Woody Guthrie, the greatest thing that man has ever done, and he put the lyrics to Ewan McCool's Ballad of Joe Stalin. He put them to the greatest thing that man has ever done. Well, now there is a recording of the actual Ballad of Joe Stalin, but I actually like this version better. So here's the CPI version of the Ballad of Joe Stalin, and then we'll move on to the remaining super chats.
Joe Stalin was a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution he fought at Lenin's side. They made the combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come all you people, we'll work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga to Stalingrad, and then Joe Stalin said, come on me boys, he kicked them out again. Joe Stalin was a southerner, in Georgia he was born, where the oranges grow thick and fast in fields of waving corn. And Joe, he was a farmer, his fingers they were green, and he planted out the biggest crop the world has ever seen. One day he looked upon his map and frowned and shook his head. There's too much brown, we need more green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So let's begin by planting trees along 3,000 miles. Joe Stalin rolled his sleeves up and he said, come on, let's start. The Volga River and the Don, they are too far apart. I think we'd better join them, so come on, help me, pal. We'll build a mighty waterway, the Volga-Don Canal. One day he looked into the north and saw the rivers three, all emptying their waters into the polar sea. No, that's not right, Joe Stalin said, those rivers, they are ours. We'll turn them round and make them work to give electric power. There was a range of mountains that was standing in the way, so Stalin put his hand out and he smoothed them all away. For Joe, he was determined to make the land all green, and that was the biggest project that the world had ever seen. Joe Stalin was a mighty man, he made a mighty plan. He harnessed nature to the plow to work for good of man. He's hammered out the future, the forgeman he has been, and made the worker state the best the world has ever seen. He has made the worker state the best the world has ever seen. Woo! Thank you, thank you.
Yep. I challenge you, even if you believe all the lies about Stalin, Tell me that's not true. Tell me we don't have unemployment insurance because of Stalin. Tell me we don't have food stamps because of Stalin. Tell me that the modern civil rights movement didn't come into existence because of Stalin, right? Yeah, I am going to stand up for actual history. All right. Can you elaborate on the lines between the working class, the petty bourgeoisie, and the lumpen as they are manifested in today's society? At what point does an unemployed person become lumpen? Okay, well, first of all, right, so lumpen, they're technically part of the working class, right? And this is what you need to remember, that it's the lumpen proletariat. That's the whole phrase. It's the lumpen proletariat, meaning that they are technically part of the working class. They don't own means of production, and they do, have to find ways to survive. The thing is that the term that's often used is declassed, meaning that they're never able to fully become regular workers, right? And that lumpen generally refers not to a working class person who's unemployed for a little bit. It refers to a person who is a lifelong criminal. It refers to a person who is a lifelong swindler. It refers to intellectual elements that live on the margin of society. It refers to Hell's Angels, motorcycle clubs. It refers to people who sell shit on the street in order to survive. It refers to, people who are not involved. They don't work for a company and produce value. They find a way to hustle. And that's not, an Uber driver is not lumpen because he's working for a big company. He's working for Uber. But, if you, go around, this is lumpen, right? Here's a great example. Here in New York City, there's a lot of people in New York City, who are, they're not from here usually, and they don't speak English usually. What they do is they go around all day long and they go through the garbage. And they just go through garbage all day long, looking for recyclable items and collecting them in order to get money from that, right? And they go through the garbage looking for items that can be sold in, 99-cent stores and such, or they go through the garbage. And you see them. And I see them in my neighborhood. I saw them in Queens when I lived in Queens. And you see them. And they tend to be immigrant folks, and they tend to be older. Usually they're like retirement age. And they don't speak English. And they just walk around the streets of New York City all day long, going through the garbage and finding recyclable bottles that they can use. But then they also look for items of clothing. They look for electrical equipment, things like that. And they, with their electrical equipment, and they take it to 99-cent stores and try to get some money for it. And they try to, give it to somebody who can clean it up and resell it, right? Well, those people are lumpen. It doesn't mean they're bad, right? And they're not criminal. It's not criminal to do that. I mean, it's not criminal to go through the garbage, but they're not producing value, right? They're kind of, trying to find a way to hustle, to scramble, to put a few dollars together. And, I would hate to see the conditions these people probably live in, right? I mean, they probably live in a basement with 25 other people and sleep on a cot or something, right? And they tend to be immigrant folks from, a lot of them are from Central America, South America. A lot of them are from Asia. And they live in horrendous conditions, and they just go around all day collecting what little bits of money, because, if you take a bunch of bottles to the supermarket, right, for the recycling, you're not getting much for that. They're going around all day, just going through the garbage, trying to find as many recyclable bottles as they can, and as many other things that they might be able to scrounge through and make some money from, right? And I mean, if they bring home $20 in a day, they're lucky. Well, you can't live in New York City, but they find a way, right? Those folks are lumpen. Those folks are lumpen. I mean, preachers are lumpen, right? They live off their congregation, right? Preachers are a great example of a lumpen element, right? I mean, technically preachers are lumpen, right? They get, out of the tithes that people pay to their congregation, they pay their bills, right? Preachers are technically lumpen because they're not producing value, and they're just they provide the service of being the minister. They provide a spiritual service, and so they're part of the working class. They're selling their time, but they're not producing value. They're kind of providing a spiritual service. You might be able to argue that some preachers are petty bourgeois, guys at mega churches that are making 6-figure salaries and have a huge mega church. But, all throughout my neighborhood, I see these storefront churches, You know, it was like a little storefront, and there's like an electric piano, and there's a guy in a suit, usually Spanish speaking, and he's like a Pentecostal preacher, and there's 20 people who sit there and listen to him preach on, that guy's lumping. He's lumping. You know what I mean? He's a lumping element, and he's barely getting by, and he's, trying to recruit people to his church so he can do his church thing, right? I mean, that's a lumping existence, right? I mean, people playing music on the street, right? And you can actually make quite a bit of money doing that, in New York City, right? Because there's such a dense civilian, there's so much civilian traffic, if you go to Union Square and you just set up in the subway all day, you can go home with a couple and $100 at the end of the night, usually, right? If you just sit there and play the guitar and people like you, drop money in your case, there's so many people that go by, but are you creating value? No, you're just kind of begging on the street, right? That's what the lumpen proletariat it is, and criminal elements, people who rob stores, people who are involved in organized crime, the Aryan Brotherhood, the Hells Angels motorcycle club, the Crips, the Bloods, the Latin Kings, MS-13. Those are lumpen elements, right? The point is they're not producing the wealth of the country. They are finding a way to scrape some of it off, right? They're finding a way to scrape some of the wealth off in order to survive, and they are doing so in ways that are precarious, right? They don't have a regular gig. They are existing on the margins of society, and they are scraping the wealth of society into their hands, right? That's what lumpen refers to, right? They're declassed workers. They're part of the working class that is scraping money off of society at large, right? And that's what Karl Marx refers to the lumpen proletariat as, right? And that if a working class person just becomes unemployed, collects unemployment, is looking for another job, they're still a proletarian, right? And even prisoners, right? A lot of prisoners, they have a job in the prison. They're working for a big company in the prison, right? They're answering phone calls for Victoria's Secret, or they're making, so there's federal prisoners who make military aircraft. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? We always talk about jobs going overseas. How many jobs have just been sent to the prisons, right? How many big American corporations have realized, oh, we can pay prisoners 2 cents an hour, because they're in prison. Instead of bringing jobs back from Mexico, why don't we bring jobs back from the prisons? If I was president, one of my immediate things, I would ban all prison labor for private companies. Right now, prisoners cleaning up trash on the highway, I'm not against that. Prisoners making license plates, I'm not against that. But prisoners doing work for private companies for poverty wages, so they don't have to hire people on the outside who they pay the minimum wage, that's criminal, right? And but that's why we have, that's why we have prisons, right? That's why we have the mass incarceration, is they can get away with paying, slave poverty wages to prisoners. Well, I would ban any prison labor for a private company, right? Because that's a plague on our economy, right? And a lot of those prisoners, I don't think they're lumpen. They just are working class people who are incarcerated. They are producing value for a big company. Maybe they did something lumpen to get in there, but once they're there in the jail, going to the prison factory every day to do work for this big company, they're not lumpen. So that's what we need to understand. Unfortunately, in the 1960s, the Black Panthers developed a new definition of the word lumpen, where they said that lumpen basically meant black. Well, that's not what it means, right? Lumpen does not mean black. The overwhelming majority of black people in America are not lumpen. They're just working class people. They have a job. They get paid wages. Maybe they're unemployed. And yes, they're the first fired and the last hired. They face discrimination. They have lower wages and lower household wealth overall because the legacy of discrimination, etc. But they're not lumpen. That is a racist stereotype about black people, is that they're all in gangs or something like that. But they're not. The majority of black people, the overwhelming majority of black Americans, are working class people, right? So there you go. The overwhelming majority are working class people. So, the Black Panthers, they argued, they kind of reinterpreted what it meant to be lumpen, and they reinterpreted that to mean, that you're, that you are, that you're a group that is impoverished, and they argued that only the lumpen proletariat could make the revolution. And in the early 1980s, the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP, they said basically the same thing. They said that, it's only those with nothing to lose but their chains. And and it's like, there's some stupid videos on the internet of, like, I remember Jason Unruhe did an attack video on me, and it was called "Caleb Called the Lumpen Criminals." And it's like, he's so out to lunch. Like, he didn't Google what lumpen, like, criminal is in the definition of lumpen. But like, it's like that there's this whole new left, what they call Frantz Fanon, who was one of the thinkers that the Black Panthers were heavily influenced by. He was like an intellectual in France who wrote about colonialism theory. And the Black Panthers themselves, and Eldridge Cleaver. And there was a whole theory that the Panthers developed where they started thinking that lumpen meant black. Lumpen meant black, or lumpen meant very poor working class person. And that's not what it means, right? You can be paid poverty wages and you're still a worker, right? And you're not declassed yet, right? A lot of times people would say, well, Appalachians, right? They'd say, well, we don't mean black. They would say, we mean, Appalachian. Well, they're working for the mining company. It's just, there's a whole new left reinterpretation. And a lot of the new left writings, you get this from George Jackson, and it's just, it's a what do you call it? It's a reinterpretation of Marxist theory, where they argue that lumpen means something different. And that's a big part of the 1960s communist movement. The Black Panthers and the New Left, Frantz Fanon, all of them, they took the meaning of lumpen and they changed its meaning. And so that's what you have to remember about that. There's a movie that I actually really enjoyed. It's one of the best movies I've ever seen. It's from the 1960s. I think it's from 1970, 1971. It's called The Spook Who Sat by the Door. And it is based on a novel that came out during this time. And it's about, a black revolution, from the 1960s. It's about a group of, a black armed insurrection against the American government. It's about like it starts out that the CIA is accused of being racist. And so they have to hire some black people, and they hire this guy, and he's the first black person to work at the CIA, and he realizes how evil the CIA is. And so he quits the CIA, and he goes back to his old neighborhood, and he starts a black revolutionary army. It's a very, very good movie. I would recommend it. The Spook Who Sat by the Door. And you can watch, I think the whole thing is on YouTube. It's actually very entertaining. It's not realistic though. It's a fantasy, right? And it's that movie. If you watch The Spook Who Sat by the Door, that's kind of what the Black Panthers were talking about, right? Is that they thought every black person is lumpen, and that there's just going to be this layer of people in American society who are so are marginalized that they will become a revolutionary army. It's a good movie. 1973, The Spook Who Sat by the Door. If you watch that, that's kind of the 1960s New Left armed struggle fantasy. And it's not realistic, right? Revolutions are made by the masses of people in their millions. They're not made by left adventurism, and they're not made by isolated armed groups. And gangsters and criminal elements are not going to make a revolution. But if you watch this movie, right, and you can watch the whole thing's on YouTube, you can watch it. The movie is about basically street gangs becoming the revolutionary army to establish a communist government in the United States. The Spook Who Sat by the Door, 1973. And it's delusional. It's wrong. It's just wrong. But it kind of, if you watch this movie, you'll get an idea of how Frantz Fanon and some of the ultra left elements, and eventually, unfortunately, the RCP in like 1980, they went wacky. And, as the new communist movement was declining, there was some of the Maoist groups went crazy. And there was this fantasy that you could have a revolution like this, where it would be criminal elements that would lead, a revolution. And that's not the case. The masses of people are the makers of history. And it is our duty to advocate a peaceful transition to socialism. Now, that doesn't mean that the ruling class will allow it, but we don't want violence. We don't want a violent revolution. We want a peaceful transition. Right? We have a program not to destroy America, but to save America with economic reforms, our 4-point plan. Now, if in response to the people peacefully organizing and putting forward this agenda, electing officials who agree with this program, and trying to change society, if in response to that the government was violent and tried to overthrow democracy, obviously, as patriotic Americans, we would defend our Constitution and we would defend the government. But that's not advocating violence, right? The people who advocate violence are the ruling class. They advocate violence. They're waging violence all over the world. They're waging violence here at home. We are the advocates of peace, democracy, and stability. And that's what you have to remember. Anyone who comes along and says they advocate a violent revolution, number one, that's illegal. Kind of. It's not clear. It's kind of illegal, right? They're not prosecuting people for it right now, but they could at any time. Two, in addition to being illegal, it's stupid because working class people don't want violence. Working class people, their lives are full of violence. There's violence in their neighborhoods. There's violence in their households. There's violence in their schools. I mean, working class people, working class life in America is plagued with violence, domestic violence, violence, violent enforcement, the police terrorizing kids in school, the violence from criminal elements on the street going around the world, and, relatives in the military who are violent, relatives who are in prison who have to deal with the violence in the prisons. Working class life is full of violence. It is a privileged middle class adolescent fantasy of like, oh, I'm going to have a violent revolution. But the broad masses of people have violence in their lives all the time. And for them, the way that they would embrace a socialist movement is a socialist movement would offer an end to the violence. Right? The Communist Party's slogan in 1932 was the way out. The way out. Right? What was the Bolsheviks? Did they come to power saying violence, violence, and violence? No, they said peace, land, and bread. And they were the only party that said, we will pull out of World War I. We will end World War I. You cannot advocate violence. You must advocate a peaceful transition to socialism. But you can also recognize the ruling class won't allow it. But it's really very, very important that you never advocate violence. We do not advocate violence. We advocate a peaceful democratic transition to socialism. And I cannot stress that enough. And that, well, anyway, I could go on about this all night, but we're almost we're over 2.5 hours. We still got a few more super chats. But anyway, we're the Beatniks synthetic laughs. Well, the Beatniks were an artistic movement. And that was in the late 50s, I think. Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac, they were kind of a precursor to the hippies. They were an artistic movement. I don't know if they were boosted by American intelligence or not. Allen Ginsberg had grown up around the Communist Party. And his mother had mental illness and had gone to a mental hospital. And that had kind of inspired him to become an artist. He wrote a poem called Howl, and he made it like a short book of poetry. It was published by City Lights Press, which was kind of a radical publishing house in San Francisco. And his poem had many references to homosexual behavior in it. And because of that, the local laws in San Francisco in the 1950s considered that to be obscenity. So he was, arrested for publishing his poem because it had all these gay sex references in it. And so, his poem, it was not that popular. He was not that well known. But then when they arrested him and he got a good lawyer to defend him in court and he eventually won, that got a huge amount of publicity for Alan Greenspan. And then, he became this kind of counterculture icon. Jack Kerouac, they were into the hippie thing. Allen Ginsberg had grown up around communists, but he wasn't one. He was very much a 1960s hippie pacifist. A lot of the Beatniks got into Eastern mysticism. They got into Tibet separatism. They got into Buddhist stuff and the Hare Krishna movement and stuff. They got into LSD and drugs later. They were a precursor to the hippie movement. They were like an artistic movement in the United States. It was a precursor to the hippies. So yeah, was the CIA involved? A little bit, probably, but we don't know. I don't know exactly. Now, Philip Hopkins is saying that William S. Burroughs, who was one of these people, well, he mentioned the CIA's involvement in Encounter magazine. Well, Encounter magazine was a Congress for Cultural Freedom, project, so it's possible. I don't know. I will say that their aesthetic is not what we're going for. Their aesthetic was, we live on the margins of society. We're a bunch of weirdos who don't fit in. We're nonconformists. We do our own thing, man. We live in poverty voluntarily, and we just kind of live on the margins of society and do our own thing because this society, we don't fit into it, man. It was very much the hippie stuff, It's not a Marxist aesthetic, right? The Marxist aesthetic is the aesthetic that you find not just in Soviet stuff, but in, social realism, right? There's a whole school of art, there's socialist realism, and that's from the Soviet Union, right? That's communism. But like Diego Rivera, he was here in the United States. Diego Rivera was a great painter, right? He was from Mexico. And Diego Rivera, he was considered himself to be a communist. He was like a Trotskyite, but he made paintings that were about working class people fighting for their rights. And, it was called socialist realism or social realism. And it wasn't from the Soviet Union. And not all of it had communist stuff in it explicitly, but it was about life, and if you look at Diego Rivera murals, that's called social realism, right? I'm trying to find one I can put on the screen for you, but it was, it was about the life of people in Mexico. I mean, he painted all kinds of different murals showing working class life and kind of celebrating human labor, which is the source of all wealth, right? And social realism here. I mean, this is a Diego Rivera painting. I'll put it on the screen for you, right? Here, I mean, this is social realism, right? And this is the kind of art that communists promoted, right? Socialist realism was obviously explicitly communist art. But, there was social realism, right? Social realism, right? Here's a Diego Rivera painting. This is social realism, right? I don't know what it is. It's like there's a guy looks like he's been beaten up or something. The Mexican cowboy is like cutting him down. Perhaps it's a scene from the Mexican Revolution. Right, it's celebrating the cowboys, the farmers, right? I mean, that's social realism, right? And that was the school of art. If you look at all the great paintings that were done during the Works Progress administration, that Roosevelt hired all kinds of painters to paint murals in post offices, and they tended to be stuff like this that would celebrate human labor, that would celebrate the working class, celebrate ordinary people as the makers of history, right? So yeah, here, I mean, let me type in post office murals, right? This is the kind of art that communists promoted, right? You said post office murals, right? Here's one, right? This one isn't communist, right? This is a post office mural from somewhere in the United States. I don't even know where, right? And this is social realism, right? This is before the rise of the disgusting CIA-funded modern art. Right, this is the kind of art that communists and the Roosevelt administration liked. Right, this is a mural. It's in a post office somewhere. Right, and it's farmers. Right, there's a working class family, and there's farmers raising pigs, raising cattle, building something. Right, that's social realism, celebrating the beauty of human labor, of the people who make the world turn, the working class, human labor, celebrated by social realism. Right. Here is another one, right? This is, again, another piece of social realism, right? This is the kind of art that that communists promote, right? This is the kind of art that the CIA was terrified of, because even though it wasn't all made by communists, it pointed people toward the revolutionary consciousness that communists were trying to promote. This is, it's got trains. It's got the mail. It's like celebrating the postal service. There's a U.S. Navy sailor, right? And it's like celebrating just ordinary people who have jobs, but saying that they're beautiful, and it celebrates strength, right? There's always strong muscles in these pictures, right? The women are always beautiful. The men are always super muscly and strong, right? And it's celebrating beauty and strength. And, people aren't all that strong, right? The guys, go to Amtrak sometime. Not all the Amtrak workers are that muscly, but they should be, right? We want to promote physical fitness. Physical fitness is a good thing. Social realist art tends to make people way more physically fit and way more beautiful than they actually are. And it tends to glorify working class people and celebrate working class people, and make them, this is social realism, right? Now, socialist realism, that's like, by the communist governments, that's different. But yeah, I love social realism, right? And that is the kind of art that the communist movement used to promote. And that is the kind of art that the Rockefellers funded the modern art to get rid of, because they don't want people to see themselves that way. So there you go. All right. And John McCarthy says, many storefront preachers have other jobs. That is true. That is true, right? Because especially in New York City, a storefront is amazingly expensive. Even out here in Brooklyn where I live, I mean, forget it, right? And so, I see, many of them have other jobs. They work another job during the week, and they're storefront preachers, and they pass the collection basket. They get those tithes just to keep the doors open, right? That's actually a really good point, John. That is a very, very good point. Very, very, very good point. A very, very good point indeed. All right, folks. Well, I think unless there's another, nope, not anything else. So I think that's our show for tonight. We had a nice long show. I'll be back tomorrow. We're just going to keep doing this. I've noticed that, traffic has increased since I started making news items, what it's about. So I'm going to keep doing that. But I need you all to help promote this channel. I need you all to help promote what we do here, because the Center for Political Innovation, before I go to bed tonight, I'm going to edit and do the final edits of the opening part of our conference I'm about to post. So that's what I'm doing before I go to bed. This train is speeding forward. We got a lot of great work to do. So on that note, I'm going to put on the closing music, and keep an eye out for the CPI conference videos that I'll be posting shortly. In the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.